Hey guys, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto became the Uzumaki breeder and every girl Kunoichi wanted this child? If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comment. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. So let us start the story.
Aburame Shino watched the blonde in interest as he spaced out once more. He didn't really stand out that much, his small form hunched next to a bed of weedy flowers. The blonde sat stilly as he watched a butterfly flutter gently between the different blooms before tentatively holding a finger out, his face serious. Shino watched in amazement as the bug landed on the boy's finger and the formerly somber face broke out in a wide encompassing grin. It painfully reminded him of his former adoptive brother Torun, the slightly older boy having left Shino to join Root in his place. Maybe it was this familiarity that led him to forge one of the strongest bonds of his life with one of the truly best people he'd ever know, especially after watching Naruto's simple act of kindness, something that the Aburame heir approved of mightily. It was this friendship that dramatically altered the life of Konohagakure's greatest reject and hero as well as saved the greatest failure of the Yondaime Hokage's short fatherhood, Uzumaki Naruto. Uzumaki Naruto was a very quiet boy due to years of heavy reprimand from the orphanage matron and other villagers whether he was good or bad. While he didn't understand why he was treated so, he suspected there was something about him that people just didn't like. There were some that just avoided him on principle, but did that with all children under a certain age, and others who avoided him while glaring from a distance. Most children were dragged away from the blonde by their parents or encouraged to pick on him, though he couldn't guess the reason, having never talked to them or hurt them in any way. It, however, seeded a bit of rebelliousness and resentment in him. The only real things that didn't seem to be bothered by him were bugs. He found spiders to be particularly interesting with their webs. Gently shooing the butterfly off, he watched it flutter around, eventually being joined by a few of its fellows, before looking down at the beetles and other crawling insects with interest. The ants caught his eye and he followed their tidy little line back to a small mound. Studying it for a moment, he almost missed the sudden charge of another boy playing tag towards the mound. Throwing himself carefully over the little pile of dirt, he allowed the boy to slam into him and fall over away from the anthill, saving it. Ouch! The boy said, his blue-black hair falling over his face. What was that for? He shouted at the blonde as he merely glared at him silently. He blinked in surprise, however, when a shadow of another person appeared between them. Why? The shadow's voice cut in. Because you were about to hit an ant mound. Thus you were about to kill them. He then decided that his hurt was less than the loss of the mound and the lives of innocent insects you were about to hurt. Naruto glanced up at his surprising defendant and recognized the boy from his school, and more specifically in his class, Aburame or something like that, the only boy quieter than him. The offended boy huffed and merely got up and left. Naruto leaned back and carefully backed away from the mound, making sure not to interfere with the little line of ants as they headed back to the small hole. Thanks, Naruto said awkwardly after a few minutes of awkward silence, neither used to talking or interacting with others their age. Both were very used to silence, one out of general necessity and disposition, the other due to enforced training from rather belligerent caretakers. No thanks needed, the boy said monotonously. Naruto cocked his head to the side to study the other boy. He wore a loose, long-sleeve, dark gray shirt, the sleeve hems could be seen under his jacket, and black pants with similar-colored sandals. He had dark brown hair that stuck up a bit, though not as spiky as Naruto's, and was covered by the hood of the tan jacket he wore. The boy stared at him behind black, oval-shaped lenses, and Naruto, curious and unashamed, stared back. Uzumaki Naruto, he offered, giving the taller boy his hand. Aburame Shino, he replied, taking it and shaking it firmly. Want to join me in finding beetles? Naruto asked, a bright grin forming on his face when the other boy nodded. The other boy helped him up and led him into the grass, naming the bugs they found with precision. Feeling a spot in his chest squeeze, Naruto wondered if this was what having friends was like. Aburame Shibi wasn't exactly sure how his son and heir became friends with the social outcast and universally, at least in most of Konoha, despised Jinchuriki, but he was pleasantly surprised nonetheless. The blonde, unlike his mother, although he had her stamina and energy, was rather quiet, if a bit spacey at times. He was a bit shy as well and unused to adults, as well as skittish around them. That part of his personality worried him and his wife, though they never brought it up with either of the children giving them positive attention. Like a feral cat, Naruto had slowly come to accept them, and even allowed his wife to hug him on the odd occasion now. Currently, the boy was with Shino looking over the first of Shino's many insect colonies. While members of the Aburame clan were immediately given to the Kakaichu upon birth, extra insects were kept either as a backup if a colony was killed off partially or totally and for specific breeding and strengthening purposes. Stepping into the doorway, he watched for a moment, observing as Naruto handed his son a requested item and joined him in watching the bugs in their special mounds. After a year of bonding, the two was nigh inseparable and regularly sought out the other when they were parted for more than an hour. For a man who hadn't made close ties until his genin teammates, it pleased the Aburame head enormously, even more than others could have possible known or suspected. After the loss of Torun to Danzo, he still had to repay the bastard somehow. Both he and his wife were relieved Shino was making friends. "Dinner," Shibi said, gaining their attention. The blonde blinked in surprise and offered a slight bow of thanks before following his friend out the door. The clan head watched the blonde and felt a bit of pity well up. The son of their fourth Hokage looked more like a street rat than a well-cared-for orphan. Just what were those orphanage attendants doing? He followed, however, and joined them in the family dining room. His wife came in carrying food and smiled at the blonde who offered to take them from her. Shino asked if it was fine for Naruto to stay the night, and she glanced at him in question, earning a nod of approval before she looked at Naruto, who'd been shooed into a spot next to Shino. "You won't be missed?" Shibi's wife, Sachi, asked as she set a plate before him. The blonde shook his head. "I don't live at the orphanage anymore and there's no one at home to mind. My apartment only has me after all." The adults blinked before turning to glance at each in silent communication. They were both a bit stunned. A 6-year-old living alone? How? Why? Shino seemed surprised by this tidbit as well and stared at his friend. "When?" he asked bluntly. "Yesterday," Naruto answered easily as the adults' gazes passed back and forth between them narrowly. "The first day of school," Shibi thought. "That's why you were not able to play after class?" Shino reasoned, forehead wrinkling. "Yes." Naruto glanced at both of the adults as they stared at him in a funny manner before scrunching down and shifting closer to Shino in an attempt for comfort. Shibi's son noticed and glanced at his parents as well before shuffling a bit closer in a silent bid to put him at ease. "How are you paying?" Shibi asked abruptly. His wife's gaze was trained on the orphan in a growing mix of disbelief and horror. "Hokage Jii-sama has a fund that he pays out to me around the middle of the month," was the quiet reply, and Shibi felt the uncharacteristic need to curse. "Ah, what are you doing for food?" Sachi asked as she took her place after dragging Shibi down next to her, her mind a whirl. As a housewife and mother, she felt morally and emotionally offended by what she was learning. "Tuchi-o-san and Ayame ne," Naruto replied. "You can't eat ramen every meal of your life," Shino said sternly. Both parents felt a moment of humor lighten their growing dismay and anger. The ramen debate between the pair was rather infamous amongst the household and Aburame clan. Shino was determined to get his friend to expand his horizons, and Naruto just wanted to eat his favorite food in peace. The argument was currently on hold since Shino didn't want all of his sunglasses stolen and hidden again. Sometimes I eat onigiri," the boy defended. The trio felt a bit of momentary disbelief and Shino resisted the urge to groan. "That would be unseemly. That's not healthy," Sachi said. "What are you doing for groceries?" She could help fix him some simple meals, and teach him some easier sides to make if he was determined to live on his own, but the next answer stopped her cold. "Nothing really, the market isn't open to me." "Why?" Shibi asked, his hand closing tightly around his chopsticks. "They're jerks." The bug users all blinked, stared at Naruto to confirm who said it, and blinked again. Naruto, who never said anything bad about anyone unless it was unavoidable, had said an insult, even as mild it was, as bluntly as any Aburame. The boy was painfully polite and proper in his usual conversation, never even thinking of offending someone with a negative comment, and even most of his sentences ending in "dezu." To do so was paramount to stating the person, or group of people, were dirt beneath his feet and deserved to die a grisly end. "Ah, Shibi said, smoothing his hand flat out and letting his angry tense muscles forcibly relax. Care to give me a description? Looking into the sky blue eyes, Shibi knew he wasn't going to like what the small blonde said next. He didn't. Naruto had the best friend in the world. But the academy still sucked majorly. Nothing could make it better, not even ramen, and that was saying a lot. This was their second year and it wasn't getting any better, and if the trend continued it would just get worse, a thought that made Naruto grimace mildly. So while Shino was able to help him, and both of the boys' parents were great, the instructors hated him and were determined to ruin his life and education. Already he was struggling to keep from being placed at the bottom, and Shino and he both knew it wasn't their fault. The same homework and answers that they would both submit would earn a nearly perfect grade for Shino but would be marked all over in red for Naruto. More so, he was constantly harassed by the other children who seemed to decide that hanging out with the bug user made him a weirdo, like their parents told them he was. Shino had been quite offended by that and Naruto even more so. Currently the duo were sitting at the back of the class, with the rest of the slackers, or good-for-nothings. Never mind that all of them, with the exception of Naruto, who was actually one and didn't know it, were to be the next clan head or the closest thing shinobi got to nobility. All of them, in Naruto's soft and almost never mentioned opinion, were nicer and better than the other riffraff that plagued them while at school. In a class of around 30 children, only 8 were from shinobi clans, while another 2 were from active shinobi families. The other 20 or so students, however, were civilian-born. That made life hellish, no doubt. All of the civilian kids seemed to take their parents' teachings to heart and were fully backed by the teachers. During spars they would do dirty things to Naruto, pulling illegal moves or not listening to the teacher when they ordered them to stop, and never, not once, did they ever get reprimanded afterward. More than one fellow student, if they were civilian-born that is, had blamed Naruto for something when he wasn't even in the room and the blonde would get in trouble for it. This meant subtle payback. Thus, more than one teacher and student had run afoul with something rather mildly annoying or irritating. One girl's lunch got covered in ants regularly, however they blamed it on her cubby being so close to the window. While other bullies suffered mild pranks with itching powder, paint, and even chalkboard erasers, nothing overt of course, but common and general enough that the victims were only angry for a few moments. After all, everyone got pranked sometimes. If they were intelligent, however, they would have realized that neither Shino nor Naruto ever got pranked and the clan heirs and members much less in comparison to them. Nobody ever said they were intelligent, however. The teachers were a problem as well, but they suffered carefully planned setbacks as well. The meaner teachers would lose their wallets or passes to different government or shinobi things and have to hunt them down only to find them later in a different pocket or somewhere in their desks where they knew they'd looked before. These cases, however, were something neither Shino nor Naruto ever got caught doing and served as practice in their stealth and trap abilities. The only teacher who didn't get hit by this was Amino Iruka, who sometimes actively assisted them in their payback, once a prankster always a prankster and all that. It didn't make life easier, but it kept them both sane. The recess and lunch bell rang and Naruto glanced at Shino in question and earned a subtle nod. Both 7-year-olds unearthed the lunches Shino's mom packed for them and headed for the small grassy clearing near the training area at the back, quickly leaving the classroom through the back door as they were dismissed. Getting to their favorite spot, both boys took their usual seats in the cool shade and relaxed. I hate it here, Naruto finally sighed after a few minutes. If it wasn't required of a ninja to pass the academy, I would try a different way. Shino grimaced behind his new high-necked jacket and nodded in understanding. He hated it as well. He couldn't believe his best friend was being hurt in such a manner. After learning Naruto was living alone and what the villagers were doing to him at the market and at his apartment, barely a day and he was already being tortured by the building manager, his parents had pretty much forced him to live with them. Naruto now rented a small 2-bedroom guest house near Shino's house in the Aburame compound and paid for his meals from Sachi. Just 5 more years, Shino said, trying to be comforting. It's almost 4 actually. We are halfway through this year. Naruto nodded and dug into his rice, quietly eating the food with a soft smile. Sachi had made his second favorite food, beef and mushroom stir-fry, and he was grateful. Class this morning had been dreadful with all the taijutsu they were practicing, and this afternoon would get no better what with shuriken and kunai lessons. Shino, catching the growing depression, quickly diverted his best friend's attention. Have you found a style you like yet? Shino asked, referencing the different scrolls and styles of fighting Naruto had been studying over the past few months. After realizing that the boy wasn't going to learn anything effectively or correctly at the academy, they were being trained back at home in chakra control, stamina, and some basic forms of all jutsu. Furthermore, his mother had taken him under her wing even more, leading Shino to suspect that they'd have another assassin in the Aburame clan. Naruto was an unofficial member and pretty much his brother, so he had to be an Aburame secretly, was Shino's train of thought. So while Shino and most of his clan didn't use taijutsu extensively, they did collect and hoard scrolls containing all sorts of bug-related jutsu and allowed Naruto to go through them to assist in his own learning and development. I was thinking, since the clan is more into spying, I'd handle trapping and combat. Ways to protect you or someone similar if we needed it. Naruto answered. I have the strength and dexterity to handle wire, and Shibi Ojai-san said I have a budding talent with fuinjutsu. That means plenty of different tags and storage for use. Shino nodded. You would do well, Shino said before he returned to eating. Naruto smiled at him in pleasure. Thanks, Shino. Ouch, Naruto muttered as his finger cut on the more advanced and sharper ninja wire he was acquiring. Now at the age of 11, he'd been training with the sharp threads for nearly 4 years. His insane healing quickly fixed it, and he picked out the next few rolls of spools he needed and some senbon and a new Fukiya one. Shino was a few aisles away picking out some kunai. He glanced up at Naruto and cocked a brow as his best friend moved closer. Nearly 6 years of being best friends with an Aburame had changed the blonde forever. He was still short but growing, his chakra preventing the early malnutrition from affecting his body too much and totally protecting his learning and thought capabilities. The blonde boy was slender in an almost feminine manner, his spiky hair grown long and carefully braided and then pinned up before being effectively covered by a black bandana. His blue eyes were soft and fond when they rested on his best friend or anyone in the Aburame clan, and he dressed in a similar fashion to all the Aburame but without the high collar. Instead, he substituted it for a face mask that covered his nose and distinct whisker marks, no doubt to help protect his sense of smell, which was comparable to an Inuzuka's, even though it also hid his identity. Shino also knew Naruto wore a mesh, long-sleeve shirt of black over a sleeveless black muscle shirt, though neither could be seen under the thigh-length dark gray jacket with black trim on the pockets and hems and a dark red Uzumaki swirl decorating the back and where the shoulders met each sleeve. His legs were covered in pants that had a number of pockets and were wrapped down from the calf to his ankle in dark gray tape before he pulled on a similar pair of black nin sandals as Shino's. In the end, Naruto was pretty much looked and dressed as a shadow. Good? Naruto asked as he held out the basket and Shino placed his own selection in. Good. Naruto nodded and they carried it to the counter. Shino pulled out their joint wallet and Naruto put the basket down. Both stared at the cashier silently as he rang up the items, Naruto musing at the benefit of hiding his identity from the general populace. No more being jilted at the register with increased pricing. Though he'd changed his getup to better suit his fighting style and training, he wasn't an overt offensive fighter, though he excelled at taijutsu, his specialty being covert operations. He appreciated the secrecy now afforded him. A few moments later, he was knocked out of his thoughts when Shino paid the man and took one of the 3 bags. Naruto grabbed the others, since they were primarily his purchases, and they left the shop at a relaxed gait, ignoring how the civilians and fellow shinobi edged away from when they realized Shino was an Aburame. What do you think about the final exam coming up? We have the chance to take it. Naruto asked, since you were able to take the genin test when you turned 11 and or entered your second to last year of academy. When that happened, you had the option to testing out early. If you decided to wait, you could take it beginning of the following year. And if you decided to wait further, you could take it at the very end of your schooling, and if you failed less than 3 times, you were submitted to a retake until you hit 3 fails. You had 3 different chances to take the exam and could take it only 3 times. If you failed one, you were not able to take the test again for a whole month if it was the first 2. If you failed all 3 chances, you were forced to become a civilian. Some students took it only once and passed ahead of everyone else, while others tried and failed all 3 attempts. I would prefer to wait, Shino admitted, if only to get an idea of the level of difficulty and prepare ahead of time. Naruto nodded. We will do well though. We are too good to have a problem. Naruto said firmly in a rare show of confidence, for his eyes crinkled in a clear smile. Shino's eyebrow twitched in humor and he nodded. Of course. Naruto took a deep breath as he slowly relaxed into his next stance. His hands moving through the different sharp angles with pure concentration and dedication, dancing through the katas under the watchful eyes of one of the best taijutsu masters the Aburame clan had. Finishing through his final movements, the woman's lips quirked in pleasure. Good, she said, congratulating him. Naruto straightened out of his stance and bowed to his teacher, flushing in pleasure. Thank you, Aburame-sensei, he said. The woman smiled at him and ruffled his hair, a rare sign of affection for the normally stoic Aburame. Then again, she married into the family after catching the eye of one of their members, so she got away with it. Ma, you've come far, Naru-chan, she said, teasing gently as she handed him a towel. The blonde relaxed further and gave her a bright smile. Thank you, Sachi Obaa-san, he said, wiping his face. I am glad you approve. Your hojojutsu too has gotten better as well, she said, motioning him to seat as she took her own place. Naruto smiled shyly and settled in front of her. Your skill with your wires is something to be envied, and your training with Kumo no Kobushi 3 is becoming quite advanced. Naruto turned an even bright red. To hear that from the infamous Jorōgumo 4 is an honor, Naruto said with a bow. Sachi laughed in pleasure at her former bingo book label. I am sure you'll be even better, little spider, she said warmly at the boy she considered her second son. Now, I have a gift for you, she stated, pulling out a small bag from where it was tucked secretly inside her obi. Naruto accepted it with a bow and opened it curiously. His eyes widened and he glanced up at her in shock, surprise, and gratitude. A series of deceptively simple silver, clear heavy glass, and black iron rings lay in his palm. If it was for the sharp spikes and hooks on the bottom, they could have been considered regular rings, perhaps even the ones poor peasants bought and wore once they were wed. Kakuti 5, Naruto asked. They were a useful weapon for fighters like him, however quite rare for anyone who wasn't a kunoichi in the seduction or assassination corps. The ones handed to him were clearly made of high quality and expensive metal in the case of the silver and iron ones, not to mention the glass, something the orphan had never thought to own until he was well into Junin ranks. Already his mind was whirling to the poisons he could learn and further equip the weapons with. He'd have to start a series of. His mind whirled in excitement. Sachi smiled as she took in his excited and overjoyed expression. He hid his expression as well as any Aburame, she thought with an amused mental snort. They were mine, she admitted and shook her head when he made to hand them back, obviously thinking she was merely showing them to him as a demonstration. They're yours now, Naru-chan, my gift and hope to ensure your success and survival. They were my mother's and someday they may be your child's or disciples. I know you'll use them well. She slipped one onto his finger and watched him adjust to the weight. This is a sign of your advancement. I'm sure you'll do well, little spider. She smiled in approval when he slipped a few on and tested them out, getting used to how they weighed so one day they could be of assistance. Naruto's face could have blinded any Aburame the next few months. His smile was so bright and happy. Shino more than once shook his head as his best friend trapped and wrapped up more than one unsuspecting Aburame in practice, his ropes and ties growing in intricacy. Even his father didn't escape the chaos, and the Aburame heir had laughed in a rare show of verbal amusement when he saw his father's put-out expression as his best friend happily hummed while looping slim hemp ropes in a diamond pattern around the captured shinobi's chest. Now, however, he observed his best friend building one of his more intricate and secret webs. Naruto, Shino said mildly as he stood on the porch watching his friend delicately make an encirclement of wires around a group of wooden and straw people. The blonde merely held up a single finger and twitched forward 3 times in an unspoken request of silence for a specific amount of time. A minute and 30 seconds later, the blonde raced up a thick tree before dropping down on the opposite side, yanking his hands back as he landed onto the ground, skidding back in a defensible position. The wires, carefully stretched and placed, instantly pulled, collapsing in from different directions. Their instant retraction sliced through the enemies, disposing of them with a vicious precision that made Shino's eyebrows shoot up in acknowledgement and surprise. Every single cut alone would have been fatal, and if there had been blood, the liquid would have coated the woody arena. Golden web. Bloody encirclement, Naruto murmured and quickly gathered his spools of wire. Impressive, Shino commented, dinner is about to start now. Naruto smiled and followed silently, the wire returning to their places and the rings freed from their work. Sitting down to eat, they murmured the traditional saying and quickly dove in. The food served out easily and the bowls of rice and soup refilled often. The test is tomorrow, Shibi said finally. Both boys had decided to wait until the third test and anticipated passing easily. While neither boy was at the top or the bottom, they had followed the plan and stuck to the middle. It had frustrated the worse and meaner teachers immensely that the blonde had done so well, and suited Shino's needs to stay with his best friend and properly assess their competition and future colleagues. Yes, Naruto said politely, handing the beef dish around. We will pass, Shino commented. Why? Because we have all the skills we need and those that the teacher doesn't know of. Both Aburame adults smiled slightly at them. I don't doubt you will. You have the main three down? Sachi asked. Substitution, clone, and henge, Naruto said with a wry grin. I am appreciative to all your care towards teaching me control, otherwise I'd never be able to use such a weak jutsu without overpowering it, Aburame-sensei. Shibi nodded and Sachi smiled at the compliment. If you pass, you'll each be taught a new jutsu. A special clan one for Shino and Kage Bushin no jutsu for Naruto-kun, Shibi said with a slight smile as both boys' attention instantly intensified. Naruto was blinking at him owlishly and Shino's Kakaichu buzzed in excitement. Both boys exchanged a glance and a particularly evil look crossed over Naruto's, reminding the adults why he was the unspoken king of pranks in Konoha. Sometime soon it shall be interesting, Shibi thought with a slight smirk. Why? Because the teachers will surely suffer some humiliating encounter, but it is no less than they deserve. Why? Because they spent 7 years trying to crush my boys and tomorrow they will prove they are far better than anyone anticipated. The pranks that come after will be mere sauce on this dango. Content in his knowledge, Shibi ignored Naruto as he politely excused himself to make his final preparations, Shino joining moments afterward. Smirk growing into a look just as evil as Naruto's, Shibi silently wondered if they would hear the screams all the way in the compound. It would be good if they did. Amino Iruka glanced up and ignored all of Mizuki's ill-tempered muttering as the Aburame boy finished his test. The insect clone had been impressive, as well as his henge into the Hokage, making it easy for Iruka to pass him. Shuffling his papers around, the scarred Chunin felt his lips twitch a bit in humor as he read the next name. Uzumaki Naruto, E.H. The blonde had been the silent pranking king for the past 6 years. While few of the teachers and students in the school had suffered from very few, big-ticket, pranks, the bullies of Naruto's year had been victim to more than a few, mild but highly irritating, ones. Nothing less than they deserved in his opinion, completely unbiased surprisingly. When Naruto and Shino had entered his class for their final year, he'd seen how dedicated and hardworking the boys were, something that had belied earlier write-ups. In actuality, Naruto and Shino could probably match, and quite easily surpass if they wanted to, the current Rookie of the Year. In his own personal opinion, the duo belonged on a team together because while they were efficient alone, they were devastating standing together against a common force or enemy. Remembering how often one of the worst and bigoted girls in the class suffered from continued hijinks with all sorts of irritating insects. Maybe it's your perfume, he'd offered mildly when queried why bees kept chasing her. Iruka muffled a snicker. Calling out the name, Iruka smiled mildly at Naruto as he took his place before them. You've done well on the taijutsu and written portions of the exam, Iruka said firmly, squashing any bias down. The boy would and could pass even if he didn't get a perfect score on this portion, though Iruka didn't doubt he would. You now have to perform all 3 of the standard ninjutsu techniques: henge, substitution, and clone. When you're ready, please transform into one of the proctors, swap with something in the room, and then form 3 clones. Naruto nodded and quietly gathered himself. A quick series of hand signals later and soft poof of smoke, and Iruka stared at a perfect copy of himself, clipboard and all. His copy smiled gently at him before rubbing his scar in embarrassment. The instructor paused in the middle of doing it himself and laughed. Good, Iruka said, marking off on the test. Another soft pop and the boy changed back to his original shape. He flipped through a series of seals and a plant stood in his place as he took the potted tree's place in the corner. Iruka fought the need to crow in joy and calmly said, "Bushin now." Another series of quick hand seals and 3 other Narutos stood there with a slight smirk appearing on their faces. Glancing at the infuriated look on Mizuki's face, the boy's previous instructor, Iruka couldn't help but feel a little smug as well. He'd told him Naruto was a better shinobi, but Mizuki hadn't listened, and wasn't that a kick in the ass? Naruto came out with his Hite 86 tied over his head, his bandana stuffed in a pocket of his jacket. The fact that his hair was uncovered had many of his classmates blinking in surprise at the bright blonde strands, having forgotten the actual color after 4 years of not seeing it. "Past," Naruto said, stopping by his equally quiet friend. "Home?" Shino said. "Yeah, we report at the end of the week for team placement. Let's go." Naruto replied, "Want to stop and get some dango?" "Fine," Shino consented, and they disappeared. Neither commented or paid any attention to the quiet study or glowers of other newly made genin or failed classmates. They had better things to do. "Here is the list of genin who are now up for team selection and final testing," Amino said, handing out the lists of names to the different junin. Out of the 30 who'd attended the academy, only 18 had actually taken the exam and passed. Out of those numbers, Iruka suspected only 9 would actually make the cut. "Ah, so Naruto-kun passed, good," the Hokage said with a smile. "I knew he'd do well. He and Aburame Shino are very dedicated," Iruka said with a smile. "We have a very good batch this year. We may end up with at least 3 teams depending on the junin and who gets teamed up with whom." The Hokage smiled at the scarred chunin and wished once again the young man wanted to be a junin and perhaps head the academy eventually instead of staying as an instructor. However, he respected the man's will of fire, and doubted he'd be able to convince Iruka before the man decided he wanted it himself. "Any final suggestions?" the Hokage asked, making the man pause. "Comments?" Iruka hesitated. "Uchiha-kun is a bit unstable in his relationships. I'd advise a junin who could focus totally on the boy and not his background. If there was a junin who would suit and be willing to take him on as an apprentice, I would suggest that, but it would do nothing for his social and emotional isolation unless he was involved in numerous interactions of different sorts. If Yamanaka-san was taking a team, I'd suggest him, if only for psychological evaluation. Otherwise Yuhi-san would probably serve him well." The newly made junin instructor blinked her red eyes at him in surprise. "I looked over all of the requirements and skills of those who were volunteered or put up as probable sensei," he said in way of explanation when he recognized the question in those ruby orbs. "Not Hitaki Kakashi?" Sarutobi asked. The aforementioned junin cocked an eyebrow at the academy instructor, who sighed and shook his head in denial. "Hitaki-san has my greatest regards as a junin, however he's not knowledgeable on how to deal with the Uchiha's isolationist issues, self-inflicted negativity, and avenger mentality." Kakashi winced but agreed. He wasn't entirely able to handle his own, let alone Sasuke's, emotional burdens. He had wanted the boy due to his connection with Obito and his own Sharingan, but it might be better to take him on as an apprentice after he made Chunin. The instructor, however, continued, though he felt bad for the slightly defeated look on the copy nin's face. "While an excellent shinobi," Kakashi earned another apologetic glance, "it is my suggestion that a well-seasoned junin instructor or Yuhi-san get him." Iruka said firmly. "The rest of the class is mostly fine, though the Kunoichi need to be firmly trained out of their fangirl mentalities." Sarutobi muffled a chortle. He'd heard this complaint before. "Would you like me to throw them to Mitarashi Anko or something?" he offered, amused. "If it helped, yes," was the blunt reply, making several of the people in the room wince. Iruka continued in a quite droll manner. "They stalk and chase Uchiha-kun around town, making it even more difficult for him to form connections and interact on a normal basis with society. Never mind the damn civilian council's interference. Haruno-san is particularly violent towards anyone who puts him in any type of negative light, and more than once a fight has erupted between her and Yamanaka Ino, even to the extent of having to send one or both to the nurse's office afterwards. Many of the boys don't work or want to work with him because of this, or merely cannot, since he's isolated both by his name and followers. The only two who don't regularly pick a fight with him, his fangirls, or any others in class, are Aburame and Uzumaki, and that's only because they're the ones that get picked on, isolated from the rest of the class, and oftentimes are verbally and or physically attacked by the collective rest. They've retreated from the worst of the failures during their time at the academy, which is something I actually approve. Considering they're in the correct mind to be effective, well-rounded shinobi instead of merely pretending to be one like many of the students I taught this year, their choice was the correct one. The Hokage nodded. Your evaluations are quite valuable, Amino-san, Sarutobi said gravely. We will of course, take all of that into consideration and put it to the greatest use. Do keep up the good work. You are dismissed. The Chunin bowed and left. Turning back to his other shinobi, the Sandaime laced his fingers and rested his chin on top of them in silent contemplation. Any requests? He asked as he watched the higher-ranked Junin and shinobi go through the lists and study the different skill sets. He was fairly certain that his son would take on the new Ino Shika Cho group, however Kurenai and Kakashi were a mystery to him. The red-eyed woman studied the list, her lips turned down a fraction. If it's alright with you, I'll take on Haruno, Hyuga, and Uchiha, she said to the silver-haired Junin. The other three, that is Aburame, Uzumaki and Inuzuka, seemed to suit infiltration, espionage and tracking. Things a former Anbu would excel at. Kakashi nodded, handing her the paper and whipping out his little orange book. He read a few pages before a giggle escaped. The Genjutsu mistress flinched in anger before stomping down the immediate need to castrate him and turned to the Hokage with a smile. Hokage-sama, here are my choices. She handed him the paper with the list of names circled. Also, she continued, her lips turning up in a smirk, Kakashi-san said he'd take all the Tora missions for the next 3 months with or without his genin squad. Did he now? Sarutobi asked, glancing at the giggling ninja as he read his little orange book. He rather doubted the man said that, but a happy Kunoichi mean a happy and healthy Hokage, so he let it go. I'll make sure to mark it down. Hi, she said brightly, thinking, take that, pervert. Congratulations, Shibi said when the two boys presented their Hite aid to the clan head. Now, Sachi will be teaching Naruto-kun the Kage Bushin no Jutsu while I explain the next Hijutsu to Shino. The blonde beamed and got up to follow Sachi as she motioned him to follow. The special clan techniques Shino was learning could only be taught to him, and it would be better to keep them a secret outside of battle, even to his best friend. Have fun, Shino, Naruto said softly before disappearing down the hall, heading for the dojo. Shino nodded and turned his focus completely back to his father, who motioned for him to remove his jacket as he took off his own. Slowly the swarms in both of their bodies expelled themselves and buzzed around each other, trading information, the next secret technique transferring that way, making genetic memories in the specialized insects saved in them from countless previous generations come to the fore. Slowly the hum died down and the Kakaichu separated and slowly returned to their respective hosts. Shino slowly entered his meditative state, letting his mind communicate with his insects once more. A few hours later he looked up and Shino's sunglasses gleamed in pleasure as he bowed to his father and sensei, making the clan head smiled. Excellent, now is the time for practice. Shino nodded sharply and stood, his jacket going back on. Swinging his arms out, he ordered, Hijutsu, Mashidama 7. The insects immediately swirled out and enveloped the practice dummy that stood at the center of the training field, put there by an expectant Shibi earlier in the day. Na sphere before converging on it. Eyebrows going up in pleasure, he smiled slightly behind his collar. This will be quite effective. Naruto easily learned the ninjutsu, his clones forming solidly next to him in a neat line. The only trouble he was having was the amount, though he was slowly getting a hand of it, which pleased both the covered-up blonde and his sensei. Good, Sachi said with a warm smile. You've got a good hand on it now, Naru-chan. Thank you, Naruto said with a sigh of relief. This is a very good jutsu for you, Sachi said as they fell into their usual seated and relaxed mode of conversation. While allowing for you to have multiple partners in setting up your nets and detaining prisoners, there is a special ability that you should know. Yes? Naruto asked curiously. The clones have the ability to learn. Anything a clone does, see, or learns is passed on to you. Sachi told him. Naruto's face blanked for a moment as the implications hit before blinking slowly. A smile slowly formed on his face and then bloomed into a grin. Amazing, he whispered. His sensei chuckled in agreement, secretly knowing that with this technique and the boy's prisoner he'd be a force to reckon with. Especially with the tight and advanced control he'd learned at her hands and those in the Aburame clan. He bowed to her. Thank you for teaching me something so useful, Aburame-sensei. She smiled proudly. You are welcome, Naru-chan, she said warmly. You're free to go now. You've successfully learned it. I'm sure you'll want to test it out yourself. Naruto gave her another bow and scampered off to find his best friend and her son, no doubt going to drag him off to one of the off-compound training grounds to demonstrate an experiment. Getting up, she stretched a bit before heading back into the family room where her husband sat, quietly proud. He took to it like a moth to light, she told him as she settled next to him, pulling her mending over to her. Ah, Shino did as well, he husband said, enjoying the evening breeze. They probably won't be back until late, Sachi mused. Naruto is going to experiment that new technique into the ground. It's only proper to do so, Shibi stated logically, and she hummed. I'm glad they had dinner already and that Ichiraku's is open so late, they'll need the food later. She paused in her work and met his gaze damply. They're growing up and doing so well. We raised them well, her husband replied in a comforting manner. We've done a good job. She smiled at that. Good. Naruto and Shino landed in their usual training ground excitedly. I wish you could learn this technique, Naruto said forlornly. It would of great use to you as well. I shall endeavor to do so when I have larger chakra reserves, Shino stated. He marveled at all the information his best friend had passed along and felt a bit envious over his reserves, but understood it came with its downsides. Naruto had fought a battle over the last 6 years to have such fine control over his chakra, something so necessary in this work and in his own personal fighting style. I'm glad you got a new technique, Naruto said with a smile. It is your 8th one, correct? Yes, there's about more to learn, Shino replied. They're all B and A class, so I am sure I'll learn more as I progress. And develop some. Everyone in the Aburame clan has their own tricks, Naruto pointed out, and Shino nodded in agreement. Well, then, are you prepared to spar? Shino's eyebrows twitched and he went into his usual stance as Naruto leapt back and joined the shadows in his own. Ready? His voice wafted out softly. Go, Shino replied, and they struck. A few hours later both were taking a break. Very interesting technique, Shino told Naruto as he lay out on the ground, his bandana off and blonde hair mussed slightly. The long blonde strands glittering golden in the moonlight. I think I will have to experiment some more with it. The potential currently is limitless, Naruto agreed, sitting up. He frowned a bit when he realized part of his carefully done hair was loose and just sighed, taking out the rest of the pins. The golden strands fell like water though, and Naruto massaged his head in satisfaction. The peacefulness of the night, however, was cut short when 2 familiar Chunin burst into the clearing. Mizuki, Iruka roared, both of them battling it out. The 2 newly made genin separated out of the way, hiding in the surround forest. The gray-haired teacher threw a series of shuriken at Iruka before he surged forward and caught the scarred Chunin in a series of punishing blows. They gained some distance between them once more, and Mizuki smirked. Ha, as if you could catch me, weakling. Mizuki taunted. Naruto narrowly watched where the teacher was moving and quickly formed his signs before calling out, Kage Bushin no Jutsu. 10 clones appeared from above the silver-haired teacher in a pummeling force he narrowly dodged. Ah? Mizuki said, skidding to a halt with his back to the woods. That demon brat's here as well? Lucky. Iruka's eyes widened and he shot forward. Hey, Uzumaki, do you know why everyone hates you? I can tell you. Naruto narrowed his gaze and merely continued his work. Iruka, however, was infuriated. The silent weave of the Jorōgumo's apprentice and his clones went unnoticed, however. The clones had served their purpose fully by scattering a series of super-strong, spider wires in a complicated manner as they attacked. Don't speak, Mizuki. You're already in trouble for stealing the Forbidden Scroll. Don't you dare reveal an S-class secret on top of it. Especially one that would hurt my students. Iruka shouted unknowingly, leading the man into Naruto's trap. The traitor shot forward to meet him and froze in surprise when he realized he had razor-sharp wires wrapped around him in silent capture. The original Naruto stepped out and the gleam of wires could be seen between his fingers and tied to Kakudi. Golden web. Ensnaring prey. He looked the teacher over and voiced his opinion plainly, fool. He easily noted part of his best friend's colony slowly crawling up the man's body from his prone position. Why you? Mizuki snarled before stiffening further when he felt something moving over his body. Finally noticeable on his dark gray shirt, unlike they had been on his black pants, were Kakaichu. They swirled in an angry orb around him. Swarm, Shino bit out as he stepped out from behind him. Finish him quickly, he stated coldly. The bugs covered the traitor and Mizuki let out a muffled scream of terror and shock. Shino was more than a little pissed with the teacher's treachery and verbal abuse. They'd suffered under this man for 7 years and were not going to put up with it now that he proved to be deceitful, especially the comments towards his best friend. Iruka, on the other hand, collapsed to his knees in relief, Naruto moving over to check on him. The glow of green chakra from his hands had the teacher smiling a bit proudly at the blonde. Is there nothing you can't do? He asked tiredly. You two really should have been the rookies of the year. Shino shook his head and allowed his insects to return to him as the teacher went limp from chakra exhaustion, only Naruto's threads holding him up. A shinobi does not stand out, Shino stated. He does his work successfully until he dies with honor in battle or of old age. The academy instructor smiled proudly before accepting a ration bar from Naruto and subsiding into a sitting position on the ground. Naruto moved over to their prisoner and pulled out some hemp rope. You're right, Iruka said as he watched the rather impressive hojojutsu his blonde-haired student demonstrated. He stared up at the sky and smiled as the flashes of Enbu appearing denoted their appearance. Want to get some ramen to celebrate? After the Hokage debriefs us, of course. The two boys exchanged a look and nodded. We'd be happy to. Shino stated. You two have completed a B rank? Shibi said amazement the next morning as the two returned dead on their feet from a night of debriefing, ramen, capturing traitors, and training. Mizuki-sensei proved to be a traitor and came charging into the training ground Naruto and I were and we assisted Amino-sensei in capturing and detaining him until Enbu could arrive, Shino admitted tiredly. Naruto just sleepily nodded, his blonde hair gathered in a play over his left shoulder. We're even going to be paid, Naruto said with a yawn. The Aburame head blinked in surprise. I guess congratulations are in order. The man said. Can we celebrate it after a few hours of sleep? Shino asked his father nodded his consent. Good. Why? Because Naruto has already fallen asleep in his ramen bowl at Ichiraku's, we're that tired. Later that week, after getting their pictures taken and the other paperwork done, they returned to the academy for the final time as students and rejoined their other advancing classmates taking their usual isolated spot as per usual. Iruka-sensei strode in and started listing off the teams. Team 7 will be Aburame Shino, Inuzuka Kiba, and Uzumaki Naruto. Iruka called out. Your sensei and team leader is Hitaki Kakashi. The two best friends turned as one to stare at the loudest boy in class and Naruto nodded at Shino before motioning Inuzuka over to their secluded corner. The Chunin continued listing off as the dog ninja approached warily. Hello, Naruto said politely. I am Uzumaki Naruto. I'll be in your care. He gave a polite bow. Shino merely tipped his head to the side and repeated the greeting. Yeah, Kiba said taking in the quietest members of the whole class. Even Hyuga and Uchiha made some noise. Stutters, yelps, and grunts counted after all. I'm Kiba and this is Akamaru. We're in your, care, yeah. He presented his dog and was surprised when Naruto's eyes wrinkled at the corners as though he was smiling. Shino merely nodded again. May I? Naruto asked holding out the back of his hand taking it out of his pocket after slipping off his kakudi. The skin was golden color. No matter how much he covered or kept to the shadows it never seemed to be as pale as Shino's. Sure, Akamaru, friend, he told the dog who glanced at him like he was stupid and sniffed the hand before licking it happily. The sapphire sky blue eyes crinkled again and the black-dressed boy smoothed a hand calmly over the dog's head in greeting. I look forward to working with you Akamaru. I have heard many good things about your clan, the boy told the dog solemnly. Akamaru barked in agreement. Do you train with him often? Naruto asked Kiba who seemed a little thrown. Kiba asked startled. Oh, yeah, but we've only been together for a few months so we're still getting to know each other. Naruto nodded, gave the puppy another soft pat and withdrew his hand slipping it back into his pocket and sliding his rings back on. The shriek of a fangirl, namely Haruno, made them all cringe. Damn. Kiba said rubbing his ears grumpily as they all stared at the growing cat fight between the blonde Yamanaka and pink-haired Haruno. I think she burst an eardrum. Thank Kami there's no crazy chicks on our team. His new teammates nodded. The Kakaichu are overjoyed, Shino admitted. Why? Because they're glad that they will never be near that kind of shriek again. At least, I hope not. Naruto grimaced and nodded, glancing over at the newly formed Team 8. He felt a bit bad for Hinata-chan and Uchiha-kun. Neither Uchiha nor Hinata looked particularly excited about their final teammate, and Uchiha even looked a bit miserable through his stony facade. I think Uchiha-kun would cry if it was not unmanly. Hinata-chan is not one of his stalkers, however, so he has at least one able-bodied teammate. Uzumaki said. Haruno is going to be useless in the field, unless it relates to mooning over him. Shino snorted in amusement and nodded. Kiba grinned and then winced when the girls started clawing and screaming at each other some more. Iruka's yells to stop them were ineffectual and merely added to the cacophony. There was a reason why he disliked cats, and the fangirls' attempts to copy the creatures did not endear them to him. Well, Kiba said, settling in with the other two boys, slightly more at ease, I think we'll get along okay. Hello sensei, Shino said calmly, staring at the door as it slowly opened. The silver-haired Junin blinked lazily at them, taking in their three figures, and said, "My initial impression?" He pointed at each of them in turn, starting with Shino, then going to Naruto and Kiba, and said, "Mute, weird, dumb." His gaze landed on Akamaru, "Cute." All of them felt fairly insulted. "Meet me on the roof." He then disappeared. The general consensus between them was, he is an asshole. Naruto glanced at Shino, who nodded. The man was prank-worthy. They glanced out the window, then at Kiba before opting to take the stairs. Both males had been trained in tree walking early on to enhance their control, though Shino hadn't mastered it yet, and was something ridiculously necessary for Naruto, who had an absurd amount in his reserves. Kiba muttered lowly as he followed his two teammates out of the room, Akamaru giving an agreeing bark from his place on Kiba's head. They got to the roof easily and found the man laying down on his side reading a distinctive orange book. Naruto took note and smiled behind his mask, glad to find a weakness, while Shino, who also recognized it, had a look of distaste cross his features, wrinkling his brow and causing his sunglasses to flash dangerously in dislike. Kiba didn't appear to know what it is and merely flopped down in a sprawl, with Akamaru leaping down from his head to a place on the roof next to them. Okay group, introductions. Name, likes, dislikes, and dream or hope. Kakashi said, taking them in. Naruto instantly sat between his two teammates, forming a comforting barrier between the noisy Kiba and the nearly mute Shino. Akamaru sat next his master, albeit slightly in front of both Uzumaki and Inuzuka, his ears fondly scratched by his new second favorite human. Kiba took the lead. I'm Inuzuka Kiba and this is my partner Akamaru. The dog barked and Kakashi couldn't help but smile at him, reminded of his own Ninken. I like Akamaru and hanging out with him, as well as training. I dislike cats and my ma's and sister's nagging. My dream is to be the best shinobi my clan has ever seen and to learn all of the Inuzuka Hijutsu with Akamaru. Kakashi nodded and calmly turned to look at Naruto, who nodded before introducing himself. I am Uzumaki Naruto. He gave a slight bow, which Kakashi answered it a bit awkwardly from his laid-out position, earning a laugh from the brazen Inuzuka. I like training with Aburame-sensei, ramen, pranks, Shino, and the Aburame clan. I have also recently developed an interest in acquiring new poisons and venoms while doing bug excursions to the exterior of Konohagakure with my best friend Shino and his clan. I dislike those who kill senselessly, or without true purpose, and belittle others without truly knowing or understanding their victim or their circumstance. I also have a dislike for those who mistreat any form of life, be it human or not. My goal is to excel at such a level that I one day become an elite Junin or even Hokage. Ah, good, Kakashi said, a bit surprised by his sensei's son. He had his behavior and calm demeanor, though he was missing the same hobbies. Minato-sensei had been a fanatic about his fuinjutsu. The last few words in his introduction, however, demonstrated his mother's fire and father's will. Something the 26-year-old approved of. His gaze lazily moved on and he gestured at the Aburame seated tautly next to the quiet blonde, who gently scratched Akamaru's back, earning a pleased huff with each friendly scrape. You're next and I'll go last. Shino nodded stiffly. I am Aburame Shino, he stated. I like training, my Kakaichu, Naruto, and finding new insects to add to my colonies. I dislike pesticides, fire used to destroy insects with no due cause, and senseless killing as well. My long-term goals are to become an adept leader of my clan one day, master my clan's hijutsu, and find a never-before-seen insect or an incredibly rare one. Kakashi nodded and tilted his head to the side. Well, as you can guess, I am Hitaki Kakashi, a Junin. I don't particularly like anything, have few dislikes and no real dreams or hobbies. The trio just stared at him. I think we can add on pathetic to asshole, Kiba thought. The man, however, didn't seem fazed and continued. Meet me tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock for your final genin exam at Training Field 7. Don't eat breakfast if you can, if you do you'll probably puke. He then escaped, shining away, leaving the genin on the roof alone. Kiba blinked at the quick escape before the words sank in. What do you mean final exam? He shouted, setting off the Kakaichu, and his two teammates had a hell of a time settling them back down. The loud boy winced since Kiba was fairly sure he could feel the look of utmost annoyance and anger burned into the back of his head. Akamaru merely put his head down on his paws and whimpered at his partner's idiocy. Naruto woke up early and stretched. His long blonde hair glinting in the weak morning light, as it reached his mid-back in its usual tangle. Sitting neatly in his sleeping kimono, he removed his futon and stuffed it tidily into the closet before praying quietly before an altar. Though he may not know who his parents or ancestors were, he could still respect them. After that, he began preparing for the day by immediately stripping his night clothes off and brushing his hair out before carefully pinning it up out of the way. His underclothes went on next, a long-sleeve mesh shirt over a sleeveless mask shirt that clung to his toned chest, and trousers with multiple obvious and hidden pockets. His weapon cases, weapons, and jacket went on after a quick check to make sure the mask was covering everything. His new Hite 8 was sewn onto the upper left side of his jacket and the metal dulled so it didn't shine. His bandana went on last, and after a final check and additions he headed to Sachi Obaa-san's to pick up the team lunch they'd prepared the previous night and eat breakfast. Something Naruto had come up with after Kiba had apologized and the trio had a congratulatory dinner at Ichiraku's where the dog user ranted for a few minutes in peace over the unfairness. Flashback. Enough, Shino finally said, silencing the loud boy to Naruto and Akamaru's relief. The small pup had taken refuge in his new teammate's lap and was happily eating pieces of food Kiba had prepared ahead of time. Naruto, meanwhile, was happy to pet and eat his ramen carefully around the small animal, even sneaking him a piece of noodle from time to time. Akamaru was definitely happy with where he was sitting. All of the teams are going through the same Inuzuka-san, Naruto said wryly when Shino didn't continue to explain and returned to his own meal. Kiba's fine, he said, scratching his short hair before slurping up some more noodles. Kiba-kun, Naruto continued. I'm sure every shinobi went through the same. The dog ninja sighed with a nod and picked up the bowl to drink the delicious broth and catch the last few tasty bits. He sat the bowl down with a clank and sigh of pleasure before a frown formed. I'm not looking forward to missing out on breakfast, Kiba muttered before ordering a second bowl of ramen with both pork and beef ribs. Naruto merely smiled and finished his third off before motioning for a fourth, much to his best friend's exasperation. Shino finished his single bowl and turned to the gyoza he ordered on the side. Variety was best in his mind, though he was becoming fonder of ramen if only because of how good Ichiraku's was. I don't think you should, Naruto admitted. However, I was thinking of talking to Sachi Obaa-san about packing a group lunch for a picnic for us. If he's even the slightest bit late, we can eat early. Aren't you worried about, pukin'? Kiba asked bluntly. Naruto shrugged. One can throw up on a full or empty stomach. It actually hurts more, in my personal opinion, to do so on an empty one. I'll just have something light for breakfast, nothing heavy or greasy that could cause it to upset easily. Naruto said calmly. I guess you're right. Kiba said with a nod before frowning at Akamaru, who barked at him. What do you mean I'd be dumb to not eat? Wait, you just called me dumb. Shino muffled another snort of amusement and Naruto just focused on getting more noodles in his mouth and not on the dog as he struggled to keep from laughing. Flashback end. Naruto stepped politely up to the open door and bowed, before being motioned in by a bemused Shibi. One would think after 6 years of living and eating with the Aburames, Naruto would have lost some of his stiff and formal politeness. He hadn't though, and it seemed to only grow stronger with each year and kind gesture. Settling in his usual spot, he glanced around for Shino. He slept a bit late, Sachi said as she finished placing the food on the table. Naruto nodded in understanding as she returned to the kitchen. Shino shuffled in as she brought out the stacked, multi-family bento box that the blonde accepted with a bow of thanks. "Thank you for all the help last night," he told her as he placed it next to him. The two of them had cooked a large lunch for them all, though Naruto had been uncertain for a few moments what to fix for Akamaru and merely boiled some chicken and kept it in a separate dish to keep it from mixing with anything else. It had all of their favorites and Naruto hoped everyone would be able to enjoy it. "It was nice to cook with you again, Naru-chan," Sachi said, taking her spot. Shino joined them and studied the boxed lunch for a moment before speaking. "Winter melon?" he asked, staring at it. Naruto smiled. Shino was surprisingly adept at smelling out his favorite vegetable. "In soup and salad," Naruto answered easily. "We also have miso soup with eggplant, mixed tempura, tamagoyaki, fried dumplings, onigiri, meat and vegetable buns, cold noodles, smoked and grilled fish, garlic chicken." Shino grimaced a bit, recalling the strong smell which Naruto ignored since he liked that kind of chicken, beef stir-fry with vegetables, pork short ribs, and dessert. "That sounds delicious," Shino stated before digging into his rice and pickles. Both were too nervous for anything overly heavy and even forewent their usual tamagoyaki and soup. They didn't want to overburden themselves or their stomachs. They finished and were wished luck. They got there 15 minutes early and Naruto blinked in surprise at Kiba, who apparently camped out at the field. The boy glanced up at them as he paused in brushing his teeth and scratched his hair in embarrassment. "Ahahaha," he said in way of greeting, and Akamaru merely gave a doggy sigh, embarrassed by his partner. Naruto set the lunch down and waved off the apology and settled himself on a bench, leaving the shadier spot for Shino. Kiba hurried through the last of his morning ablutions while Akamaru came up to Naruto and hopped into his lap again. Naruto instantly went about petting and scratching him. "Akamaru really likes you," Kiba said, studying his best friend with some surprise. Inuzuka dogs were usually more standoffish than this. Akamaru, however, seemed to be even closer to this boy than his own littermates. The dog barked a reprimand and Kiba scratched his head in embarrassment. "Not that there's anything wrong with you, Naruto. I've always done well with animals, especially canines," Naruto admitted, waving off the implied insult. "He attracts butterflies as well," Shino said, hiding his smirk behind his collar when his friend glared at him. That was an embarrassing secret that was supposed to stay in the Aburame compound and between them. Kiba merely laughed aloud at it. The dog boy's stomach growled and Naruto glanced at him sympathetically. "Do you want to eat some of the lunch for breakfast?" Kiba nodded sheepishly and Naruto efficiently unpacked the bento and fixed the boy a plate before handing over a cup of soup and eating implements. Naruto then fetched out the boiled chicken for Akamaru and handed it over to Kiba, who glanced at it warily, although apologetically. "Ah, thanks, sorry," Kiba said with a grin and tried a piece of the boiled chicken Naruto made for Akamaru before letting the puppy have some along with some rice and tamagoyaki. Naruto wasn't offended, understanding it was part of training and Kiba's responsibilities. Eating quickly, the genin watched the sun move across the sky, and after an hour Naruto built 2 more plates and refilling Kiba's, so they were all eating and chatting quietly. After 3 hours the trio were already practicing and sparring. Kiba was pleased to be working with another partner genin and was fast enough to give Shino a challenge while Naruto practiced some animal-related hojojutsu on Akamaru, who was amused to be captured and neatly bound. A loud explosion disrupted it all and Naruto nearly face-planted in surprise, though he quickly untied Akamaru and escaped into the bush to observe. His bow shuriken one quickly sliding free from their arm holsters and in the palms of his hand. They were laced in a sedative and mild hallucinogen that would bring down most people and disorientate those more experienced. Akamaru took a stance next to the boy, his hackles going up. Shino and Kiba also retreated, though not into the woods, and instantly assumed defensive positions, the Kakaichu swarming and Kiba moving into his clan's wild taijutsu stance. The smoke disappeared and Kiba face-planted. "Yo," Kakashi said, approving of the instantaneous defensive and observational positions they took. "What was the third thing Kiba stated as his favorite thing to do?" Shino quizzed him sharply. "Training," Kakashi said with a nod of approval. He felt the subtle pressure of chakra in an attempt to dissolve any genjutsu he may have been preforming and approved further. He smells right, Kiba said, getting up from eating dirt and whistling for Akamaru, who appeared from another spot dashing out to join his partner. Naruto said, coming into the open. I assume we shall begin taking our test? No questions as to why I'm late? Kakashi asked, a bit disappointed. He had such good excuses too. Would you tell us the truth, Hitaki-sensei? Shino said, moving up to flank his best friend as he joined them in not quite reaching or kicking distance. No. Then let's skip the spiel and go straight to the test, Kiba said with a grin full of teeth. Good. Now, did you eat breakfast? He asked. He looked them over and already knew the answer. Yes, Naruto replied calmly, more like brunch to be honest. If you want some food, there's plenty waiting for you. Ah, well, he said with a put-out sigh. He brought out the 2 lunchboxes. I guess you won't need this. Good job disobeying your commanding officer. The last sentence was sarcastic and highly unappreciated by Naruto, who merely cocked a brow. You're our commanding officer? Naruto asked with an eye smile of his own. I thought we had to pass a test first? Sneaky, Kakashi thought as he took in those twinkling sapphire blue eyes. I guess you're correct, the Junin said. Well then, onto the test. He fished out 2 bells and dangled them before the 3 boys. This test only has a 66% pass rate, he said solemnly. To pass, 2 of the 3 of you must get one of these bells. The person who doesn't get a bell will go back to the academy for another year. Kiba instantly looked fearful, though he hid it under bravado, while the other 2 scoffed, or well, seemed cynical in their usual fashion. Shino arching a brow and Naruto tilting his head to the side and shaking it slightly. Doubtful, Shino stated dryly. Genin teams are made up of 3 genin and a Junin teacher. The only time they're rebuilt after the initial assigning is in the case of a member's death, serious debilitating and career-ending injury, or irreconcilable differences and difficulties between the members that result in critical and multiple mission failures. Kiba asked, glancing at his new teammates, his expression confused. Akamaru, however, and Naruto were nodding in agreement. It was a sad day in ninja life when your dog was smarter than you, though Kiba hasn't seemed to notice it yet, Kakashi thought. Well, Kakashi said, you still need to get these bells off of me. He pulled out a timer and set it for an hour, within this time limit, which is 1 single hour. The person who I believe fails the most gets tied to one of the training posts and left there overnight. Understood? Kakashi asked. The trio of boys and the puppy nodded. Good, then ready, set, go. The trio jumped back into the woods and vanished as the Kakaichu attacked him as a distraction. Eye smiling, Kakashi wondered if this would be the first team he ever passed. Naruto and Shino motioned Kiba closer and the trio put their heads together. He's weird, Kiba muttered with Akamaru softly barking in agreement. True, Naruto said, but now we plan. What about the 2-bell rule? Kiba asked worriedly as he crouched next to the bandana boy. As illogical as it is, Naruto and I could stand another year at that school if it meant becoming a genin, Shino stated, making Naruto grimace behind his mask but nod seriously. Worse come to worse, we'll just steal the bells and his book. Naruto said. We should probably do that anyway. His book? Kiba asked. That orange one he was reading last night? Yes, Naruto said. Did you recognize it? Kiba shook his head. Naruto hummed and explained. It is one of the Icha Icha books. The dog boy's eyebrows shot up. Porn? He cackled in question, muffling his laughter behind a tanned palm. Naruto pinked a bit and even Shino shifted a bit awkwardly at the blatant evaluation before recovering. Well, read too, Shino said, adjusting his glasses in disgust. It was practically dog-eared. No offense meant, he said to Akamaru, who merely gave a doggy grin of understanding. So, Kiba said with a slow smirk, get the book and we win the battle. Amazingly, all the perverts felt a disturbance in the force at this, especially the super pervert and owner of said soon-to-be stolen book, causing them to shudder and in the case of the super pervert flee from his newly made peephole. Kurenai and Tsunade, along with other Kunoichi who strongly disapproved of such habits, felt oddly satisfied. Kakashi wasn't surprised when Akamaru and Kiba came charging out from 2 different wooded positions. They were the team's obvious lead attacker along with Abarame's Kakaichu. Since he'd been brushing off the little chakra eaters for the past few minutes, as carefully as possible since he knew the attack was coming with every single gentle swipe. He hadn't wanted to kill the beetles, he'd seen what happened when you did, and the owner's retribution was a thing of nightmares. He dodged their oncoming rush with ease and watched them vanish back into the tree line. He was surprised, however, when he felt a slender line collapse under his weight and a net dropping down out of nowhere to capture him. He quickly dodged it in a sudden swarm of Kunoichi before ducking a series of shuriken. His one eye widened as the metal stars suddenly exploded, filling the area with smoke. His hand went to waist to protect the bells and he quickly fended 2 attacks to that area. He had to hide a wince when he heard the audible snap of Akamaru's jaws close to his special place though. He leapt free of the smoke and into another wire trap, which this time was sticky like a spider's web. The former Anbu then had Naruto dropping out of seemingly nowhere on top of him, his feet colliding with his stomach, knocking the breath out of the former Anbu as the small boy reared back before swinging his fist forward. Kakashi defended himself from a punch and felt the prick of metal on his skin and the slow numbing of a fast-acting sedative. Damn, he thought in admiration, assassination tactics with a mix of capture and surprise. Very good teamwork as well, he finished in amusement. Naruto's sandals connected with his torso once more and the smallest boy in the group shoved back away from the man's reach, his hands stretching out to wrap the man further in a new part of the web, encasing him. Uzumaki landed and pulled the wires taut, locking him in with his hands splayed flat and ineffective against his thighs. Golden web. Encased prey, the trap user said as he planted his feet and weighed the wires down. A swarm of Kunoichi appeared and captured the bells from his grasp, as well as something in his hip pocket before they drained him of his chakra. He gave a token struggle, his arms locked to his body. He hadn't sensed Naruto setting up any traps and was rather irked that he'd missed it. Got it? Kiba asked Shino, who nodded, and a small swarm of bugs appeared, dropping something between them. Kakashi instantly sweat dropped and felt a shiver of fear go down his spine. My baby, his mind screamed. Sitting placidly on the ground was his favorite Icha book. Akamaru sauntered to stand next to the orange-bound novel and stood rather perilous over it. His back leg went up and a look of evil crossed the dog's features as well as the boy's standing behind the little dog. Please no, Kakashi said, not above begging as a second swarm of bugs deposited the bells next to it. Is this a pass, sensei? Naruto asked mildly and earned a fevered nod. Naruto nodded and the trio turned and walked away. Where are you going? Kakashi called out. He wiggled a bit, hoping the wires would loosen now that Naruto wasn't holding them. He noticed rather belatedly that they were pinned to the ground with weights and seals meant to absorb any chakra that ran over it. When did Naruto get into Fuinjutsu? He pondered as he struggled. Nowhere, Kiba called back as they settled next to his encampment and the partially eaten lunch. We're having lunch, aren't you going to get me down? Maybe he shouldn't have been so lax about his defense, especially when he heard the calm response from Shino. Maybe, but you did say the one who did the worst would get tied to a tree. Little bastards, he thought and struggled harder. Feeling no give, he collapsed forward limply and miserably eyed his book. Fuck. The Hokage had a deceptively somber look on his face when the Junin returned that evening to give their genin assessments. His eyes, however, were silently laughing whenever they settled on Team 7's sensei. The shinobi in question was currently cradling his Icha book protectively. All of the Junin were staring at him like he lost his mind as he muttered and stroked it, apologetically. It was handled with a fondness that wasn't even afforded to some serious romantic partners, and was, quite frankly, incredibly creepy. The Hokage could barely keep from laughing out loud. Report, Hitaki-kun, Sarutobi said. The humor was apparent in his voice, earning a glare. Those little the genin of Team 7 have passed successfully. The man reported petulantly, his bottom lip poking out in a grumpy pout. Would you please describe how they passed? Kurenai asked in interest. The man turned and glared at her. They acquired the bells through a startling amount of teamwork in roughly 10 minutes, about 30 minutes into the exam. He bit out. Did they acquire any leverage? The Sandame asked, and the glare was withering. The silver-haired former Anbu muttered something lowly. I'm sorry? The Hokage asked, enjoying this far too much. They took my book hostage, he growled out after a moment. Little bastards. Tricky bastards, Asuma said with a grin earning an angry glower. Well, the Hokage coughed, preventing the growing tension to come to a boil. Let's get this meeting over with so you can. He eyed the experienced silver-haired Junin in amusement. Comfort yourself and become acclimated to being instructors. I'm sure it will be an eye-opening experience for you all. If no one could meet Kakashi's eye for the rest of the night for fear of breaking down in hysterics, it was fine since the man was too busy comforting his baby. Sume pretty much fell over when she learned how her son beat the belt test with his two teammates. While an excellent demonstration of cooperation and teamwork, it was hilarious how they used the one weakness their sensei exhibited to ensure that even if the worst happened and only two did pass, they could force him into passing all three. It had her rolling on the floor clutching her stomach as tears fell from her face at the conviviality. Kiba and Akamaru merely sat pleased as they tore through dinner and talking about their two new teammates excitedly. And Akamaru really likes Naruto, Kiba said while Akamaru yipped in agreement. Ah? Sume said as she finally got control of herself and sat up. Uzumaki Naruto, right? Her son nodded and she fingered her chin in silent thought as her forehead twisted. What's he like? She asked since she missed most of his explanations and descriptions while laughing on the floor hysterically. Her own partner returned, finally joining them after having moved out of the room during her flails of excitement and mirth to avoid getting smacked. Kuromaru sat next to Akamaru, who instantly curled up next to him, barking up to the older ninkin in conversation. Quiet, Kiba said after a moment. Nice. He uses wires and fuinjutsu. Poisons as well, Akamaru barked and Kiba nodded before continuing. He like animals and Akamaru thinks he smells like tempered wildness and power. He doesn't seem off or anything? She asked in concern. While she didn't hate the Jinchuriki, she had concerns about his stability at times. Kiba thought it over while gnawing on a chewy bit of cartilage. Nah, not really, the only thing weird about him is all the glares he gets, Kiba admitted with a confused frown. Akamaru stole his bandana as a prank, got to keep it though. His mother glanced at the dog who now wore a black bandana around his neck rather jauntily. The pup looked rather well in it actually. And I accidentally messed up his mask during a spar so he wasn't as covered up as usual. So while we were walking back people kept giving him these looks. He seemed pretty uncomfortable about it and stuff. The glares were pretty harsh I guess. Kiba frowned at this and Sume felt torn between feeling proud over her son's immediate close ties with his teammates and the fact one of his teammates might be a risk to him considering what he contained. However, she didn't let that color her voice or face. Mostly. Ah, Sume said with a thoughtful nod. I guess I can understand that. She muttered. Kiba said glancing at his mother who winced at the slip. Nothing, she said with a headshake. You were saying he wore a face mask? Kiba blinked before shrugging off the weirdness. Yeah, he's got a really good nose. Not as sharp as mine or Akamaru's but pretty good anyway. Kiba said with a smile, he's pretty cool and a good cook. Lunch and breakfast was awesome. Smiling faintly at her son, Sume couldn't help but think she'd have to meet the boy herself one of these days and make her own evaluations. Naruto smoothed his jacket and checked that his bandana was in place before leaving the house and joining Shino on the walk to the training ground, this time Shino carrying the pre-made lunch. They reached the training ground with time to spare and saw their other teammates already there. Akamaru bounded over and Naruto crouched down to stroke the puppy's head in greeting before switching out the bandanas. This one had a leaf emblem blazoned on black cloth in white and a ragged edge that was further highlighted by a border of bright green. Like it? Naruto asked. You needed a Hite 8 as well, though it doesn't have a metal plate, sorry. The dog barked in what Naruto thought was a compliment or thanks and hopped into his arms in an excited wiggle. Kiba seemed a bit amused and greeted Shino first while the blonde and white dog were talking to each other. Got lunch ah? Kiba said with a grin. Thanks, and Shino gave a nod. Naruto endeavors to make sure we have all the necessities possible, Shino stated, he enjoys it as well. Why? Because it allows him quality bonding time with my mother, who also likes having someone to cook with. That's nice, Kiba replied scratching his head. Hello, Kiba-kun, Naruto said finally joining them. Akamaru hopped down showing off his new accessory. Nice, Akamaru, Kiba complimented with a wild grin. Thank Naruto, he said glancing up. Naruto merely smiled happily in a relaxed manner. It's nothing, Naruto said waving it off. Another glance at the lunchbox had Kiba smacking himself. I almost forgot, he said in a mixture of apology and shout. My ma invited you guys over for dinner tonight if you're free. You know, a meet and greet. She said to invite you family as well. So I guess your parents are coming too. I shall notify my father, Shino said blandly, a Kakaichu fluttering off. Will we need to bring anything? Naruto asked, his brows scrunching. Nah, Kiba said, just come by around 7, my ma said. She and Hana are fixing barbecue, I think. They'd actually said a nice sit-down dinner, but Kiba hardly remembered putting on his shoes this morning, never mind what he was told while half asleep. Then thank you for the invite and we will see you then, Naruto said with a polite bow. Shino nodded again and Kiba scratched his cheek awkwardly. Well, wanna spar, till the sensei gets here? Kiba suggested. Shino buzzed in excitement, no doubt looking forward to finishing what they'd started the other day. I'll practice my fuinjutsu, just let me know when one of you wants to switch out, Naruto offered, stepping back and earning a nod from both. Watching them fight aggressively, Naruto snickered in amusement. Very energetic, like puppies that found a new playmate, he murmured before unsealing his fuinjutsu training equipment. He'd let the boys be rowdy and wear themselves out, he had practice to do. Kakashi appeared 3 hours late once more in a small puff of smoke and took in the scene before him with a sharp eye. Kiba was crouched next to Naruto trying his hand at making explosive tags, the easiest of the seals to make. Akamaru was napping curled between the pair while Shino sat quietly watching as his brother in all but blood gracefully guided his new teammate's hand through the motions. Keep a constant stream of chakra, the bandana-wearing boy said with confidence. The Inuzuka boy had a look of determination on his face and sat back with a sigh as they finished the small strokes. Let's test it, shall we? Naruto said, picking it up and wrapping it around a stone before focusing some chakra into it and tossing it into the center of the clearing. It fizzled for a moment before giving a dull thump and catching on fire more than exploding. Damn it, Kiba growled. I'll never get this. He scratched his head with both hands grumpily, ruffling his hair with vigor as he worked out his aggressions on himself. He calmed a tad when Naruto touched his shoulder comfortingly. It's a fine, you are still a beginner, Naruto said softly. Shino has no luck with it and it is a difficult branch of shinobi arts to master. It takes a lot of control and power. The feral boy nodded, looking slightly more chipper, and picked up the book laid out between them to study whatever was on the page intensely. The Junin cleared his throat pointedly and the trio glanced up. Hello, my adorable students, Kakashi said, thinking, little bastards. He still hadn't forgiven them for stealing his book and tying him up for 30 minutes, though he was secretly impressed by their abilities and attitude. Impressed, but not thrilled to have it used so effectively against him. Again, little bastards. How are you this day? Did you wait long? I hope it didn't bother you. Actually he did, he hoped it pissed them off as they pissed him off the other day. Not really, Kiba said distractedly. We barely realized you weren't there. A tick mark formed on the silver-haired man's head. Shino cocked his head in agreement and Naruto bowed apologetically before shrugging a bit helplessly. What are we doing today, Hitaki-sensei? Naruto asked, gathering his supplies and putting them away except for the book he let Kiba borrow. He rose gracefully and approached, leading his two teammates over after picking up Akamaru, who snuggled into him cutely. The silver-haired Junin relented a bit at that. He was such a sucker for dogs. He still didn't forgive them though. Teamwork exercises, he said cheerfully, ignoring the need to ring the silent prank king who gazed so innocently up at him. A devious mind lurked behind those supposedly guileless and sweet, sapphire blue orbs. Like the exam? Kiba asked, crossing his arms behind his head lazily, book jammed into his pocket for later. The man twitched visibly. No, not like the exam, he grit out. Battle tactics and group spars. Against you? Shino asked. His Kakaichu could be heard buzzing just ever so slightly in excitement. Against each other, I want to further assess your capabilities. The Junin stated. Shinobi were secretive, so he'd have to. Couldn't y'all ask us? Kiba questioned in a rather blunt manner. Would you tell me? The Junin parried. Yes, the trio said as a group. Our lives depend on your leadership. Hiding skills would be foolish, Naruto stated, staring at him solemnly. The man blinked and studied the young genin. Okay then, Kakashi said, We'll begin with a brief evaluation of your capabilities, jutsu knowledge, and stamina. Have any of you mastered the tree walking exercise? Naruto nodded and raised his hand, his partners shook theirs. Kiba wasn't even sure what the tree walking exercise was while Shino had just started on it a short while ago and needed some more time practicing it. The Kakaichu eating up his reserves made his control better in some ways but also worse since he didn't use them often outside of clan Hijitsu. Kakashi turned to the wire using Genin and asked him to demonstrate it before starting the other two on practicing it and taking Naruto aside. He had the boy go up and down a few times before nodding. The blonde hadn't lied. He headed down like an experienced ninkin's nose after ascent. Water walking? He asked, studying him. Aburame-sensei and I perfected walking on water roughly a year ago. Naruto informed him with a proud eye sparkle. Why are you so advanced at chakra control? Kakashi asked, noting Shino knew while Kiba looked interested, both getting up from a recent fall and watching the pair as they paused and trying to go up. Naruto flushed a bit in embarrassment, the tops of his cheeks pinking over his dark gray mask. Kakashi fought the urge to coo. He secretly approved of the boy's outfit and was glad to have another mask-wearing shinobi on his team. After watching him eat yesterday, he knew the boy was skilled and experienced enough to eat without removing the mask, navigating the slip built into it like a pro. Not that his teammate, Kiba, noticed and was obviously curious over. He could see the food leading to his teammate's mouth. He just didn't know how it was getting in. My chakra reserves are very large and difficult to manage, Naruto admitted. It's why I can't use swords or long weapons since I put too much strength into things. Instinctive conduction of chakra energy, my instructors put it. Wire traps require precision and timing, as well as a good strong yank, so I have no problems with them. I'm accurate with hand weapons, but if it gets too large I have a habit of breaking the item in question. Shino, who had neatly leapt to the ground when he realized he was overpowering his next step and overheard, winced, remembering the training staff Naruto had accidentally buried into a training post when his mother had tested him to see what weapons would serve his short height well. Kakashi nodded, remembering the boy's mother. While Kushina had been a sight and experience using an entire metal staff made of highly conductive chakra metal, she'd gone through heavy wooden, practice ones like toothpicks at a restaurant, shattering them with ease. The blonde wasn't done talking either. A shinobi also has to keep their presence down, and with my fighting style, having a loud chakra presence makes things difficult. I have to keep it under control, Naruto said. Can you release it so I can see? Kakashi asked, and Naruto nodded after a moment of hesitation and consideration. His body tensed before relaxing, and the Junin blinked in surprise when the boy's energy washed over him energetically in waves, almost excited, as if happy to be released. Whoa, ah! Kiba said, falling from his tree in mid-run, startled by the sudden flux of power in the area. He stared in surprise at the source and sniffed. His chakra-enhanced senses were going haywire at the sudden influx of data. Even Shino seemed surprised as he paused on a branch. His best friend hadn't cut loose often in the past few years. The almost sweet-scented waves of energy glossed over both trackers in training like the first warm smell of a good restaurant after opening the door when you're hungry. Intoxicating and delicious. That's a lot of energy, Kakashi marveled, his own nose catching the scent, and the genin nodded, the blonde's body twitching and straining as if to keep from running around. This is quite difficult, the blonde said, taking off his bandana and his hair sprang free, the long blonde strands moving wildly. May I stop? He asked. The Junin nodded, still flummoxed. Instantly the power dampened, going down in steps as it was slowly folded away once more. Both of his teammates instantly missed the sweet smell and coating of power but kept from saying anything. The expression on their teammate's face was one of focused control. The shortest boy's body calmed and the anxious twitches went down until the boy sighed in obvious relief. He sunk to his knees before sitting down completely. Tired? Kakashi asked, crouching before the boy, who slowly gathered his hair up and draped it over one shoulder to braid. A simple black tie was pulled out of his pocket and draped over his thigh as he wove the soft, golden strands. Kind of, it takes a lot of power and control to force it back down, sensei, Naruto admitted as his hair fizzled a bit in his hands. The man studied the hair for a moment before blinking in surprise. He grabbed a strand, making the boy pause in surprise, and his single eye widened as he felt the energy pulse in the capture lock. You use your hair braid as a conduit of power and to keep it locked away, he said half accusingly and half in amazement. Naruto stared at him before shaking his head, making the former Anbu pause and say in confusion, "Don't you?" The boy sighed and smoothed the frazzled strands carefully. "Kind of," Naruto replied. "My hair's reaction to the energy is a result of my training, since I am currently studying under the woman known formerly as Jorōgumo." Kakashi blinked at the familiar title, in the art of assassination, infiltration, stealth, traps, and battle. "One day, when my hair is not only long enough, I'll be able to incorporate it into my fights and my equipment. I don't store my power in my hair to suppress it but to strengthen the strands for their future use. The intricate braids I do help the power move through a conduit in a particular fashion, however at my stage the hair glows rather randomly and is quite distinctive in color and its actions. I won't have it to a proper level to keep the power hidden for another 6 months, perhaps a year latest. Aburame-sensei says that's when I'll start learning the first of her hidden spider-killing techniques. Which is why you usually keep it covered," Kakashi reasoned with a slow nod. "The mask. A byproduct of having chakra-enhanced senses," Naruto said. "I need to be able to distinguish different poisons, medicines, and antidotes as well as people without relying on my eyes, which means I have a heightened sense of smell. I can do it to a lesser extent with my taste and hearing, however, I'm still in training for that since it isn't as instinctive for me for some reason. I'm still trying to get my sense of smell in control too, since it switches on at the slightest jolt." Kakashi nodded in understanding. He had powerful smelling abilities and used the mask for the purpose of hiding his identity and to keep smells at bay. It also hides distinctive facial markers. Naruto quietly stated as he tugged down the mask, revealing his whiskers with a sigh. "While it helps build up my stamina, although mine is already quite impressive, it doubles not only as a training tool but a filter and a way of keeping my identity hidden." His sensei nodded. "Are you going to redo the braids?" Kakashi asked as the boy slowly ran his fingers through the lower ends of the strands and formed his hair into a loose braid, tying off the end with the ribbon he dug out earlier. He earned a headshake as his answer. "My hairpin's true purpose has been lost," Naruto admitted. "They are designed to absorb some of the residue chakra. However, at the level one was releasing it at, they were overpowered and are now warped. I would have to return to my place of residence to get more, and considering we are only practicing today, there is no reason for me to go through such efforts. I'll leave it down." The man glanced at him with a raised eyebrow. "It takes an hour and a half to get them right, sensei. I have no wish to do it for a second time in a period of 24 hours. The hair need to rest anyway since they've been overtaxed in a matter of moments." "Fine," Kakashi said, "we'll move on to other things. While your teammates work on their chakra control, tell me about the ninjutsu you can do." Naruto sighed but moved into a comfortable seiza position, the braid flopping back over his shoulder and his mask repositioned. "Aburame-sensei has most recently taught me." Sakura was on cloud 9, she was paired with the love of her life and Ino Pig was left in the dust. Oh, all the time they would spend together would have to mean something. Thank Kami, she'd passed her new sensei's test and her other genin partner was so mild and meek-mannered. It was like she was alone with Sasuke-kun. Skipping into the training area, she positively brightened as she caught sight of her crush. Hiding behind a bush real quick, she did a quick check on her makeup and looks before coming out and sauntering over to the boy as he leaned against the tree looking mysterious. In all actuality, she looked like an insane patient, the hip movements ugly due to her mostly prepubescent body. The blue-black-haired boy, who was ignoring her, was starting to wish they'd failed the exam and forced back for another year so he could, hopefully, end up on another team. He scowled a bit and glanced around for his sensei and other teammate. They were both better than the crazy pink-haired girl who was one of the worst stalkers that he had. Seriously, he thought grumpily, anyone would have been better than her, anyone, except maybe Yamanaka. He grimaced mentally and nearly sighed in relief when he noticed Hinata coming towards them. She shyly waved her hand at the two, which he returned while ignoring Sakura's bad attempts at cajoling him into talking. Hello, Uchiha-kun, Haruno-san, Hinata said politely, her stutter forced down mostly. Sasuke gave her a curt nod and returned to staring at the gate waiting for their sensei that appeared moments later via Shushin. "Hello sensei," Hinata immediately greeted, earning a gentle smile. The greeting echoed by Sakura moments later. Sasuke giving a brief head nod when she appeared on time. "Hello, Genin," Kurenai said with a smile. "Congratulations once more on passing the academy and my personal test. Since we're now a group, I thought we'd tell each other a little about ourselves before I see where exactly you are in your capabilities and what specialties you may have. It'll give me a better idea of what kind of squad we'll shape out to be." "A kind of squad, sensei?" Sakura asked in surprise, her thoughts having never considered it. She's always seen ninja, as well, these awesome characters that did amazing things and were heroes. All three of her teammates turned to stare at her for a moment, all of them a bit surprised. "I didn't think we'd make a squad, aren't we just going to learn from you until we make Chunin?" Kurenai started before catching herself mid-reprimand. Letting out a long breath, she motioned them over to a bench. Hinata took the center position at her gesture, glancing nervously at the angry pinkette who glowered at her for taking the seat next to the last Uchiha. The boy looked relieved just the slightest bit and glanced at her silently in thanks. Kurenai twitched as the girl opened her mouth to protest. She cut it off before Sakura could annoy her further. "Hinata-chan, would you care to explain?" The Junin Kunoichi said darkly, earning a surprised look from Sakura, who flinched when she caught her sensei's angry gaze. The Hyuga nodded, taking a deep breath in. There are many purposes shinobi say serve, however it is not possible for them to serve every single one. She took another breath and forced the stutter away fully. This is what leads to the different divisions and corps. The most famous ones are seduction, anbu, and the torture and intelligence division, also known as T&I. The manner in which ninja are divided is through their different skill sets and abilities they hold or have. For those who specialize in chakra control, they may turn to the medical corps or even infiltration if they're experienced and a delicate touch with genjutsu. Those who are stronger at taijutsu, ninjutsu, and tracking often work as patrols. Those ninja who belong to certain clans often have an ability that is strong in a specific job, since they are actually bred and trained for this. Kurenai nodded proudly and Sasuke stared at the girl like he'd never seen her before. Sakura just pouted. "Does that mean one day I'll be separated from Sasuke-kun?" She whined, and her other teammates turned and stared at her incredulously. Kurenai nearly gave in and smacked her in the head like she did to Anko when she was acting up, but instead growled. The pink-haired civilian-born girl flinched again. "Sasuke-san, do you have an example of this you can share?" she said dryly, turning to her lone male student. He nodded stiffly. The Hyugas are well known to be excellent trackers or medical nins because of their dojutsu. Their fine control is taught from childhood and is almost instinctual, allowing for work in many of the finer and less conspicuously powered arts. The Uchihas, he paused here and swallowed around his closing throat, once served as the police nin because of Sharingan. We were able to dissect crime scenes, and opponents' moves were almost instantly learned since our dojutsu was able to see the undetectable in seconds. We are also known genjutsu specialists not only for being able to see through them, but to be able to inflict them due to our close studies of the different elements connected to those arts. The woman nodded in agreement. Good. The trio ignored Sakura's high-pitched squeal in support of the boy and pushed on. "I'm glad you and Hinata took your lessons so seriously, Sasuke-kun." She looked narrowly at the civilian, who froze under her gaze once more. "It's nice that someone takes this job with the seriousness that it requires." The girl opened her mouth as if to contest this, but shut it sharply when the glare intensified. Kurenai was starting to regret choosing Haruno. Even if the girl had a good grounding with book knowledge and a fine level of control on her small pools of chakra. "Listen up," she said sharply, "my job as your Junin sensei is not to teach you fancy jutsu or sparring techniques. My job is to make sure you become the best shinobi you can be. If I find you are dragging us down in any manner," this was said while staring at Sakura particularly sharply, "I will recommend your immediate removal and reassignment. As of yesterday, you passed my test by proving you could work as a team, something that is highly valued by our village. However, now you have to prove yourselves as more than just a civilian in a headband. I chose you three for a reason, due to my own abilities, and hope to pass on skills that would make you part of the elite. However, you will only go as far as you are willing to be capable of." The trio stared at her, and she knew only one wasn't getting it. Meeting the determined gazes of her two dark-haired students, Kurenai wondered if she'd have to get her best friend Anko in on the training with Sakura. The pinkette was going to piss her off no doubt, and she didn't have the patience to break a fangirl out of their irritating and obsessive tendencies. Taking a deep breath, she said, "Now, tell me just what kind of shinobi you think you are, and I'm going to do my best to make you as capable as you plan to be." Hinata went through the spar nervously, although Sasuke-kun, as he told her to call him, was surprisingly patient, matching her move for move as she traveled through her style. Kuronai-sensei was currently berating Haruno-san, a surprisingly bright academy student but a bit of dumb genin, over her ideology after realizing just why she was a kunoichi. While it was nice that the other girl was fighting for someone else's recognition, Haruno's case, in her teammates' opinion, was straight out wrong. However, Hinata and Sasuke were sparring, and she moved away from this as she instinctively moved through the different katas and positions of her family's special taijutsu. Seeing an opening, Hinata moved in and struck, winding her teammate as the open palm strike punched into his stomach. Stepping back startled, she immediately stammered out an apology. She rarely hit anyone while fighting at the compound, and her hitting the Rookie of the Year was nothing if unexpected and unbelievable to the shy girl whose only friends were two of the quietest, gentlest people. Oh no, she thought at the currently absent Shino and Naruto, he's going to hate me. What do I do? The boy, however, merely straightened and looked her over in approval. It is fine, Sasuke said through gritted teeth, studying his opponent. He hadn't thought much of this girl back during their school years, but she was surprisingly capable. The girl had been much like the two shadows, Uzumaki and Aburame, silent and awkward, and spent time with them whenever she seemed to work up the nerve or the class required groups of three. However, she'd proven to be one of the best, though her confidence was a bit weak, especially if he remembered her placement among the top 3 kunoichi who graduated. He had a feeling that if the girl was a bit fiercer, she would have beaten out Sakura and Ino and been the unrivaled best. "You're a strong opponent," he admitted a bit jealously, "but I will be stronger." He swore. Their teacher had stared at him when he admitted his dream before asking, "And after you accomplish that?" which had thrown him for a loop and forced him to actually consider it. She'd merely sighed and shook her head, clasping his shoulder and telling him to think beyond that and consider why else he wanted to be strong. He further considered it as he took the shy girl in. Their fight continued for several more minutes before coming to a pause. Hyuga Hinata was weak in many ways, but she was secretly determined and, most of all, kind. Her actions reminded him a bit of his mother, sweet and soft but with a steel-like spine that came out at the oddest of times. While he'd loved his father, he'd adored his mother. "Why do you fight so hard?" he asked her as they stopped to catch their breath and check over their wounds. Nothing was serious and, with a little ointment, there would be little pain the next day. Hinata, startled by the question, stared at him for a moment, her soft, shy face paling for a split second before the color returned in a rush and her face firmed in determination. The trembling lips and awkward glances leaving, and a strong, growing kunoichi stared back at him. "I want to change my clan," she said with a whispery voice that denoted no nonsense. Sasuke blinked. "Change your clan?" he asked as she turned to look off for a bit. Do you know anything about the Hyugas?" she asked, her fingers clenching and twisting and poking together before her waist in obvious agitation. No, he'd never thought past his own except about whom he could fight to get stronger, not really. "The Hyugas are divided into two. The branch family," she said, "and the main family." She turned to look at him again. "The branch family despises the main, and rightly so. We were absolutely horrible to them." Sasuke blinked. "Then can't you be nice?" he asked and winced at the naivety in the question. Sadness descended over her features and she sighed. "Every non-main branch member of the family is branded by a seal that is controlled by the main family, especially the head," she said with surprisingly flatness and anger. "It marks them as slaves and whipping boys to the main, it hurts them on command." "I hate it." Sasuke stared at her, and neither noticed the other two watching them from a bit away. Sakura's face a mix of horror and embarrassment as she took in her own teammate's goal, and immediately hers seemed so selfish compared to Hinata's. A girl who was hoping to change something everyone seemed to stand for. "I'm weak though," Hinata admitted, and I can't stop it." You have a seal?" Sasuke asked, feeling a strong amount of anger on the timid girl's part. Hinata shook her head. "I'm the oldest daughter of the main house," she stated, and the possible heir. Sasuke stared at her uncomprehending. "But there's no guarantee I'll be considered the heir after my sister graduates." The implications became clear. "I won't let you get branded," Sasuke said, his mouth moving without his command. The words hissed angrily and with clear determination. "Resolved." She glanced at him pityingly. "I highly doubt you'll get a choice in it." Sasuke escorted Hinata home and glared fiercely at the guards when they reached the gates, almost blaming them for the slightly smaller Genin's troubles. "I'll see you tomorrow for practice and missions, Hinata-chan. I'll be by to pick you up," he said gruffly as the girl bowed in goodbye to him, his gaze softening on her. She mumbled something similar and disappeared behind the gates, which immediately shut, sharply cutting her off from his gaze. With one last dark look at the guards he left, hands shoved deep within his pockets and his shoulders tense with distemper. Hinata-chan was nice. She was also screwed over by a sibling more talented than she. She was him in reverse, trapped by living demons in her waking hours instead of being tormented by dead ancestors and family while asleep. Both of them had doubts about ever completing their dreams and were half-doomed in a manner that was apparent and depressing. While he had one enemy, she had dozens. He punched a wall and cursed when pain shot up his arm, before ignoring it and stuffing the aching hand into his pocket. Glowering at the ground, he returned to the Uchiha compound, for once not haunted by his family's red eyes staring up in death all around him, but instead by a pale-faced, lavender-eyed girl who seemed more terrified going home than leaving it. Kiba's head went up when he heard the shuffle of feet on gravel. Straightening from his place on his bed, he scrambled to look out his open window and grinned widely as he saw his teammates make their way up the pathway with two older figures. Both wore modified outfits of their usual genin uniform, and Naruto's hair was down instead of in a braid, a dark cream band pushing most of his long hair back, leaving two long strands to frame his face. Their companions, obviously Shino's parents and Naruto's landlords, followed sedately behind them. Shino looked a lot like his dad, though his hair was a bit tamer. His mother reminded him of a deadlier Naruto, no doubt Naruto's teacher in shinobi arts. "Oi!" he shouted in greeting, attracting his partner's attention before clambering out of his window onto the house's patio roof before jumping off, Akamaru following him out. "Hey," he said when he landed before them and they met him after walking a bit more. "Hello, Kiba-san," Shino said in his usual stiff manner. "Thank you for inviting us to your home." He bowed and Naruto repeated the same message with an equally low bow. Yeah, welcome," he said awkwardly. Akamaru jumped onto his head, before pushing off of his forehead and leaping into Naruto's arms with an excited bark. The blonde giggled and cuddled the dog closely. "Akamaru," Kiba growled and earned a doggy laugh from his best friend, who then pointedly ignored him in favor of greeting his favorite blonde with continued enthusiasm. "Kiba-san," Shino cut in, preventing another argument while hiding a smile as his best friend cuddled the canine. "May I introduce you and your mother to my parents?" Kiba flinched and glanced over his shoulder to see his mother standing behind him, hands on her hips with an irritated scowl on her face. "Yes, Kiba," she drawled, "have them introduce us inside the house, instead of out here, as is proper." Her son scratched his head in embarrassment and ushered them in, all four giving a polite bow and thanks for the invitation to dinner. Soon's gaze tracking them as they followed the two Inuzuka in. When they entered the guest room of the building, introductions were made all around and then repeated when Hana, the clan heir, joined them. "So," Sume said, as she sat at her place in the front, her gaze on Naruto as dinner got on its way, "I heard you're a trap expert?" She studied the Jinchuriki as it cuddled her own partner's, Kuromaru's, youngest pup, Akamaru, in his lap. The dog was one of the best hounds ever birthed, and she'd been proud when her son and the dog had immediately clicked. With how the puppy was behaving though, it seemed as though it found the human sacrifice just as comforting a presence as his own mother and partner. "Yes," Naruto answered, "I am training to be an expert infiltration and trapping operative." "Got any tracking skills?" she asked, her head cocked to the side, her appraisal of her son's teammate quickly turning towards a positive one. "I can have some basic understanding since I've worked with Shino and assisted in his own training," Naruto said. "I'm more of a support, however, in that type of work. Training under me has made him more of a wait until the prey is caught in the web type," Sachi said with a knife-like smile as she met the brazen woman's eyes, her own narrowing in warning. The blue eyes of Naruto also read with the knowledge he was being judged. However, the dark gaze of the former shinobi known as Jorōgumo read deep disapproval, and Sume bit back a sigh, immediately abandoning the thread of conversation she'd been attempting to plot out. Subtlety had never been her strong suit after all. "Ha," Sume said, picking up the teapot. "Want some more tea?" she asked, shoving the clay earthenware's spout towards the boy. Blinking, he brushed a stray strand of gold hair out of his face and smiled politely. "Thank you," he said with a slight bow, offering his empty cup to her. "I am most appreciative." The rigid formality seemed to be a scold, and she slightly adjusted her opinion again. The brat hadn't approved of how she acted either. Not that she could blame him. Damn it. Kiba watched the tension build between his mother and the two more feminine of their guests in confusion. His mother's offer of tea had been an obvious attempt at apology, and Naruto's stiff agreement was juxtaposition to his normally friendly, if quiet, and slightly distant, demeanor. Sniffing, he tried to read the emotions via their scents and ended up having to hide a scowl. The strong scent of the garlic and ginger he'd eaten hid it too well, and he grumpily dug into another bite, accepting he wouldn't be able to understand that way. He glanced sneakily at his sister from the corner of his eye and took in her appraisal of his new friends and tried not grumble angrily. "Don't they trust my own judgment and opinion?" he thought, annoyed with them both. He could understand them being protective, but the Aburames and Naruto had been totally, absolutely polite throughout the whole night, and his family was acting like a bunch of jerks. Thus, dinner ended on a tense note, with his mother and his sister shooing him and his team off to play, and leaving the adults behind to catch up and get to know one another. Kiba groused in frustration and led his two new pals up to his room. Glancing back at his mother and sister, he offered them a look of complete upset and felt a bone-deep satisfaction when they both flinched and looked a touch ashamed. Satisfied, the youngest of the Inuzuka main family led his friends upstairs. He wanted to ask Naruto's opinion on where to buy the best fuinjutsu stuff in the village. Aburame Sachi had been retired since her first attempt at getting pregnant some 15 years ago. Now, a satisfied housewife and part-time instructor with two growing boys, she was pissed. Staring at the Inuzuka head silently, she wondered if the Sandame would truly be upset if she donned her old Hite 8 and declared a duel between her and the slightly more voluptuous woman. "What," she said darkly, "exactly was that?" The two other women looked slightly embarrassed and shared a look before Sume answered. "I was worried about the Jinchuriki," she admitted. "Kiba is quite fond of him and wanted to know how dangerous he was to himself and others." "So you made a folly of inviting a fellow clan head to dinner and embarrassed your son by unsubtly poking and prodding at a newly made comrade's abilities," Sachi hissed. Her hair crackled a bit as she almost instinctively reached for her jutsu. Sume hastily shook her head, holding her hands in a silent plea for time and patience. "I like the kid so far," Sume said, "but I don't get whatever happened with him. You ain't active like Hana and me are. We hear things about the trouble the Jinchuriki in Suna gives his folks. I ain't saying anything against Uzumaki-kun," she said quickly, the rising ire turning to killing intent. She darted a look at Shibi, who sat by and refused to meet her eye or give aid. His wife handling things quite well in his opinion. "I just want to see where the boy stands. He doesn't even know about it," Sachi almost shouted, her hands going up in exasperation. "He's a shy child who's been bullied, taunted and tormented for years. He doesn't deserve your silent condemnation and fear. Do you know they threw him out of the orphanage at the age of 6? He's been renting a guest house on our compound since then. That mask he wears? He's glad to be able to hide his features. That bandana? I'm amazed he gave it to Akamaru. He needs it to hide who he is. Yet he gave it away. He's proud of his abilities, is probably the strongest fighter in the whole year group of his. But he will never be acknowledged for it. Not until he dies in his efforts probably." She continued angrily. "He and Shino could be better than that Uchiha if they wanted. In fact, they are better. Both of them have been training and excelling. I would put them in the Chunin exams right this second and they'd pass. With Naruto's chakra reserves and control, he could become anything he wants. He used to say he wanted to be Hokage, to be acknowledged. He doesn't anymore. He stopped smiling for a month once when he said that to a stranger and they tried to choke the demon brat for, and I quote, talking to their betters and trying to rise above their station in life. He nearly got beaten to death when he was 8 for trying to go to that blasted festival to celebrate his birthday outside for once." She broke her random words, spilling out. He turns another year older and he doesn't get to have his parents sweep him into their arms and wish him a happy birthday. He's too busy trying to avoid a damn mob of people who hate him for saving them, for being burdened. Sachi said almost brokenly. He'd take a blade to the heart for anyone and people only see that thing. People were never said to be universally intelligent or rational, Sachi, Shibi said tiredly. Sume hunched over a bit embarrassment. Hana didn't meet anyone's eyes, ashamed of herself for allowing rumors from civilians color her own opinions of a fellow shinobi. I am sorry, Sume said. I am sure he's a great boy, it's just the thing in him is dangerous, the most dangerous of the 9. If the container of the first Biju is having so much trouble, I worry about what will happen if anything ever damages his own seal. From my intelligence, the Suna never used a proper seal on their container, Shibi said stiffly as his wife turned away to compose herself. Further intelligence says the boy is heavily targeted by the case cage and attacked regularly by assassins. While Naruto has not had trained assassins after him, until the age of 8 he would regularly be beaten, starved, and mistreated by the general populace. Sume stared at him in shock. Abarames always served in the outposts, Shibi said. Our insects are perfect for infiltration and notification, just as we are. We have spies throughout the entirety of Hai no Kuni. As head, I hear things before the Sandame in some ways. Information brokers, Sume said as she studied the aloof clan head. The Aburame had never fully been integrated into the village hidden in the leaves no matter how loyal they were. It made her wonder what else she'd missed about this secretive intelligent clan. Espionage nin, Sachi corrected turning back. The best, she smiled warmly at her husband who tilted his head in thanks at her compliment. Of course, that means they attract the best assassins, she said sweetly. Is that what you're teaching him? Hana asked, speaking for the first time that night. I'm teaching him how to be the best shinobi he can be. Sachi stated proudly. He's the heir to the Jorōgumo. A lock of her hair freed itself and formed into a sharp point. He will be the best Jorōgumo and I have no doubt about it. He has a will of fire that is unsurpassed. Naruto was visibly tense the rest of the night though he tried to be cheerful. His offer to take Kiba shopping with Shino and him on their next trip gained him a brotherly head rub from the boy which made the blonde squirm. However, when they left both Sume and Hana apologized for their actions, stating they were nervous about an unknown shinobi being near their relative though their fears were assuaged and that they were wrong in doubting him. Naruto felt there was something else, another reason perhaps, but let it go with a stiff smile and a slightly relaxed manner. After a final cuddle with Akamaru, who seemed determined to make the boy feel welcomed even if his partner's family screwed up, they left. The next morning the group of genin and one dog met Kakashi at the training ground, this time the man running only an hour late in catching Naruto in mid-spar against Akamaru and Kiba. The boy's hits were sharp and evasive, his body dipping and twisting as his legs shot up and connected in hitting the joints before his hands came in and punched in quick combinations. The attacking style was short, efficient, and brutal. It heavily supporting his attack and escape mentality of fighting. Incredibly useful for a trap artist or assassin when the point was to kill the prey rather than capture or beat it into submission. A sharp series of punches at a few weak spots and one of the few joint locks the style had lead into a full-on pinning that had Kakashi's eyebrow arching in amazement and approval. The boy certainly knew how to use his smaller frame against his opponents, it appeared. Gah! Kiba grumbled as Naruto shoved his face into the ground, trapping one arm under his body and another with his right hand, twisting it back and up. His knees dug painfully into the back of the bigger male's thighs and he shivered a touch when he felt the kiss of Naruto's kakudi at his neck. I thought we said no weapons. Shino shook his head from where he waited next to a panting and exhausted Akamaru, the training and sparring a bit much for the young hound. No, Shino corrected, we said no projectiles, blades or rope-like objects. Naruto's kakudi do not count as any of those things. If anything it isn't a weapon and more of a tool. You're a tool, the boy spat out as Naruto finally released him and got off. Akamaru gave a doggy snicker from his place, earning a petulant pout from his best friend. Akamaru, you're supposed to be on my side, Kiba whined as he massaged his shoulders and arms to loosen them. They ached from the blows and pin, Naruto having positioned them so no response could be easily made. The guy was surprisingly strong for someone so damn short, Kiba thought as he finally got to his feet. Sorry, Kiba-kun, Naruto said apologetically. But I'm trained to kill, not incapacitate like you are. There's a difference? The boy grumbled and Naruto nodded, taking the question seriously. Your clan is a group of skilled trackers, no doubt meant to go out find and capture individuals. The kills are largely done by a long-distance opponent and your fighting style used as a way of defending against a larger group of attackers or if your prey has reinforcements. Naruto said firmly. Kiba grumbled but didn't disagree. It sounded a lot like what his mother would say during training. While your clan's fighting style is impressive, against someone trained to kill within 3 blows, a drawn-out battle is unfortunate for the both of us. I'm not meant for forward confrontation mostly, unlike you Kiba-kun. Your attacks require groups unlike I who would be working alone or with little backup. He has also been trained in his fighting style a bit longer, Shino said, supporting his friend and reassuring his teammate. Your clan starts your training at 9, right? Kiba nodded. That's when they were deemed large enough and strong enough to learn the fighting since it was riskier than many others due to its brutal nature. Before that was lots of stamina and strength training. Not that they stopped that. It got heavier and even more exhausting. Shino merely pushed his glasses thoughtfully up. Naruto and I both started 2 years earlier at 7, so we probably have a year and a half on you at least. Though I can't match you in strength, Naruto is merely a nightmare with his stamina and strength being so high. Mother says it is probably due to a bloodline, though we can't be sure since he's an orphan. Kakashi silently and mentally applauded Sachi-senpai's excuse and finally caught his genin's attention. Yo, he said as he joined them, taking in their appearance. None of them looked too battered, so it would be easy to get on with doing missions. Hello sensei, Naruto said, greeting him with one of his usual polite bows. I hope you are well. The Junin gave him an eye smile and nodded. Sup, Kakashi-sensei, Kiba said, clambering to his feet, Akamaru taking his usual position on the boy's head. Shino joined the 4 of them seconds later. I was thinking about taking you on your first missions since we started you on your exercises, Kakashi said. What kind of missions, sensei? Naruto asked. At our skill level, I highly doubt we'll be doing anything too advanced. Naruto remembered Iruka-sensei's lecture on mission levels and discussion both he and Shino got after helping catch Mizuki. That reminded him and he blinked. Oh yes, Naruto said, glancing at Shino in embarrassment. The other boy seemed to remember at the same time and adjusted his glasses in equal discomfort. Shino and I completed a high B-rank mission before we met you. Kakashi and Kiba both blinked. The words seemed to sink in faster with Kiba because he reacted first. What? Their teammate yelled in surprise. A B rank? What? How? Shino forced his Kakaichu down and the dog user flinched when he heard the irritated buzzing, instantly quieting himself. Sorry, he said sheepishly. Care to explain? Kakashi asked, annoyed that he didn't know this tidbit. The night we earned our Hite 8, Shino and I were training out on Training Field 86, the training field that's near the West Forest and not used often. Kakashi nodded, knowing the training field they'd mentioned. While there, the traitor Mizuki came charging into the clearing we were using with Amino-sensei on his tail in mid-fight. Apparently Mizuki had stolen something of value to the village and was taking it to someone on the outside. Kakashi stared at them. They weren't done and Shino picked up the next part of the story. While there, Naruto and I incapacitated him and held him until Anbu arrived. Iruka-sensei suffered mild injuries that Naruto treated. We then reported to the Hokage and were debriefed. Shino finished. They're still deciding on how to reward us. There was mention of jutsu scrolls or payment via some more advanced tools that are unavailable at our current level. Both seemed a bit pleased at that. How did you tie him up? How did the fight go? Kiba asked, not too interested in the rewards. The fight was the best part and they'd totally glossed over it. Naruto distracted him with Kage Bushin no Jutsu while layering a trap net around him. Iruka-sensei accidentally taunted the man into attacking him, thus luring him into the net. While the man was held tight in Naruto's wires, I released my Kakaichu on him. He fainted from chakra exhaustion and Naruto proceeded to tying him up with his Hojojutsu. That one bird, Anbu said Naruto was particularly skillful at it. The boy blushed. Kakashi, however, nodded and made a note to speak with Amino Iruka and the Anbu on the team to get further details. Sorry about forgetting, we meant to tell you immediately but the bell test and training exercises had it slipping from our minds, Naruto said apologetically. Well, Kakashi said with a sigh, you won't be doing any B ranks until you're more experienced genin or, in the most likely case, chunin. That is, unless one of the missions is misclassified and goes up in difficulty. That is not overly common, however, he grimaced here. There seems to be a tradition where the first C rank for any group, no matter what, always goes wrong somehow. If it does do that, we will cross that bridge when it happens. Are we starting off on C ranks? Kiba asked. The sensei shook his head however. No, to qualify for a C rank you need a minimum of 2 months of D ranks and at least 12 D rank missions at that. We'll be doing missions every Monday and Wednesday. Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday will be team exercises and training. Saturdays we'll work on group dynamics, such as strategy and teaching trips if we can manage. Sundays are your own. The trio of genin and one puppy nodded. Good, then we'll head to the Hokage's tower and see the mission desk about getting you the first of your missions. They won't be exciting though, if anything they'll seem more like chores. They are, however, to give you time to get used to your team and to remind you of who you're defending and dedicating your lives to. With that the Junin led them away. They had missions to start. Sasuke and Hinata stood in front of their sensei while Sakura sulked on the edge, her pink hair pinned up and out of the way and her clothing forcibly changed to something better suited for a shinobi. Gone was the bright red dress and in their place were knee-length dark chocolate-colored tights, a dark forest green dress with brown bandage wrapped tightly around her neck, upper arms and her waist to keep the dress from catching on anything. While Kurenai wore her white bandage dress regularly, her mission outfits were drastically different when she went outside the village and she wasn't going to let anyone on her team die just because they wanted to look pretty and girly. Hello, Hokage-sama, Kurenai said. We're here for our first mission. The stately man nodded and glanced at Amino Iruka who was sorting through a selection of D ranks. Before they could be assigned one, Kakashi and his team joined them. Hello, Hokage, the silver-haired Junin said cheerfully, Team 7 reporting for duty and a mission. His genin lined up neatly next to him, though one stood rather relaxed-like until his partner nudged him slightly forcing him to straighten. Ah, yes, of course, Kurenai-san, Kakashi-kun, he said cheerfully. Kurenai noticed Hinata's shy wave at two of the boys on Kakashi's team and was surprised at the motion. The one in a bandana smiled kindly at her through his face mask, while the taller boy with a raised collar nodded stiffly in greeting. Sasuke caught the motions and studied the two briefly, warily. The blue-eyed boy who'd smiled at Hinata caught his eye and offered a smile and slight head nod before turning his focus back to the front. Sasuke, recognizing them as two classmates who'd never bothered him before, let it go and focused as well. We have 2 D ranks available, Iruka said. This one is for finding Tora the cat. Kakashi winced as the Hokage handed it to him. The other is to find all the missing Nara deer in the northeast forest near their compound. Kurenai's eye twitched and her genin sighed. That sounded like it would take hours. Dismissed, the Hokage said cheerfully, and the 2 genin teams left with their Junin sensei. Kurenai noticed as the 2 she'd seen greet Hinata drop back next to the girl and listened in on their conversation, knowing she wasn't the only one. Hello, Hinata-chan, the one in the mask and bandana greeted her in a friendly manner. How have you been? Settling into your team all right? The shy girl nodded. That is good, the tall boy said. I am glad for you. Thank you Shino-kun, Naruto-kun, she said shakily but with a smile. Are you well? She asked. We have done well with our new team so far, Naruto stated. We mesh fairly well though Shino's poor Kakaichu keeps swarming because of Kiba-kun's penchant for yelling. He gently teased, earning a huff. Ah, Naruto. Shino. Hurry up, Kiba called and the 2 nodded. Naruto gave the girl a quick hand squeeze in goodbye before jogging after Kiba and the rest of his team. Do you like him? Sasuke asked, feeling jealous towards the masked boy as he stepped up to her side. The feeling was odd and he rather hated it. The girl glanced at him with wide eyes. Naruto-kun? Hinata said in surprise, like a boyfriend? Sasuke nodded stiffly. She shook her head, no, he's just one of my closest friends. When we were in our first 3 years of school he and Shino-kun regularly saved me from BU bullies. I admire their determination and am happy to be on such good terms with them. However, Naruto-kun isn't really interested in girls I think, And Shino says love at 12 isn't love but your hormones acting up. Sasuke said silently pleased. You'll have to introduce me sometime. I never spoke to them in school. They were pretty quiet. Hinata said, they mostly train and study, so I think you'll like them. Sasuke watched her as she stared after her friends, her face happy, and shrugged. Kurenai watched this with a hidden smile. Already two of the most alone people in all of Konoha were becoming closer. Keeping her hand over an irate Sakura's mouth, she said brightly, come on team. Let's go find those deer. Cats, in Kiba's opinion, sucked. Tora the cat, in everyone's mind but specifically Kiba's at the moment, was a demon that should be killed. Groaning, Kiba resisted the need to rub his cheeks. The scratches covering them would only make that idea painful. Naruto sat next to him gently treating the marks he got on his arms while Kakashi handed the irate feline back to its owner. A lucky mix of Kakaichu, sleeping dart, and one of Naruto's hemp nets had caught the demon, although poor Kiba and Akamaru had served as bait. Damn cat. Finishing with his teammate's arms, Naruto moved on to treating Kiba's face. The cleaning solution on the small pad stung and Kiba hissed, earning a chuckle. That hurts, he yelped as the cotton pressed firmly against one of the deeper cuts. Keep still, Naruto advised firmly, his fingers deftly treating the dog user. Akamaru had already been taken care of, having gotten a rather nasty bite on his ear that Kiba's sister would need to look at later. The blonde's own bandana had suffered under the cat's claws, and his mask was ripped in a number of places, forcing its wearer to discard it, much to Naruto's dismay. Kiba grumbled but watched his teammate's face as he gently went over the different wounds, treating them. He looks so girly, Kiba thought with an inner chortle at Naruto's long lashes, big eyes and girly-looking face. Naruto, do you ever pretend to be a girl? Kiba asked, and Akamaru stared at his partner in disbelief. Shino, catching the comment, turned and stared at him as well. Naruto, however, just nodded. What? Shino said, goggling at his best friend in shock. Are you saying you cross-dress? Naruto nodded again. The Abarame's remarkable brain shut down and he stared uncomprehendingly at the blonde. Naruto rolled his eyes and slapped the final bandage on, earning a yelp from Kiba. Shino, Naruto said, why was your mother known as the Jorōgumo? That prompted the boy's mind back into working. She was able to get to different targets by pretending to be high-class geisha, prostitutes, wives of diplomats, and other female characters. Her techniques allowed her to enter unseen as any more than a pretty civilian or bed partner and leave with the mission complete. Oftentimes she'd escape just by screaming in surprise, after finding her target assassinated the next morning. Shino reasoned. He stared at his friend, still confused, and said, So, Naruto said in a rare show of exasperation, ninja are never meant to be what they appear on the surface. One has to look beneath the underneath. By learning how to do different roles in both, I can become an expert assassin. A mark of my graduation from under Sachi Obaa-san is to develop a technique to support this work and carry out an assassination using it in only the skills I've developed as an apprentice to the Jorōgumo. I already have the technique. I merely need to get the assassination done. Can we see the technique? Kiba asked, and Shino nodded in curiosity. Naruto sighed but gave in. He stood back a few paces and went through a series of seals before saying, in embarrassment, Oryoke no Jutsu 1. A poof of pink smoke, and before them stood a beautiful girl with long, elegantly done black hair swept partially up, soulful black eyes, and pale skin, dressed in an outfit that covered a very well-developed body. Her makeup was done elaborately, and Naruto quickly flicked a fan open to cover his face shyly, the blush on his cheeks real. Whoa, Kiba said, gawking at his male teammate. You're freaking hot. Naruto, blushing, snapped his fan closed and, in a poof, changed back into his usual form. That is quite impressive, Shino stated, forcing his mind to actually work. How is it different from a regular henge? Regular henge can break under pressure or use of chakra, Oryoke no Jutsu. He flushed in embarrassment at the name he had come up with when he was younger, so he figured it was okay. Transforms the body completely, allowing for. Naruto turned bright red at this, a variety of acts. Kiba's mouth dropped open. You mean you can? Naruto covered his mouth quickly, cheeks flushing further. Shino was starting to get concerned. He didn't want Naruto overheating. I've never tested it, he said haltingly, but I can fight and use my jutsu while transformed via my Oryoke. Kiba nodded, equally in embarrassment, and turned away to stare at the wall. Scrambling for a bit of his dignity, Naruto said, "I'm going to the bathroom. Please tell sensei I'll be back in a moment." After he left, Kiba turned back to Shino and asked, with all serious, "Is it gay to want to do stuff to Naruto when he's like that, or like perfectly straight?" The Aburame heir barely kept from smacking himself in the face. He did, however, punch his teammate in response. Cradling his jaw, Kiba muttered, "Stupid question." Akamaru rolled his eyes and hurried after Naruto. He wanted better company than his hormonal partner right now. Naruto returned and was surprised when the Hokage asked him to wait for a minute. The Hokage had always made sure to look out for him after learning of his abrupt departure from the orphanage 6 years ago, and he guessed that he was looking in on him. "Probably a check-in to see how I'm doing," the blonde surmised with a fond smile. The two chatted for a bit as they caught up before Naruto finally made to leave, his teammates going to meet for dinner, when someone burst into the room and tripped over nothing. "Fight me, old ma, jerk," the boy shouted before falling flat on his face, having choked himself with his overly long blue scarf before promptly tripping on it. "Honorable grandson," someone called as their hurried-sounding feet carried them towards them. "What in the—" Naruto said before getting cut off. Dressed in a shirt, shorts, a ridiculously long scarf of blue, and with a weirdly shaped gray helmet that allowed a small ponytail of brown hair to stick out from the very top, was a small boy. His head went up and he glared angrily at Naruto, who stood in parade rest several feet away. "You tripped me," he shouted angrily as he jumped to his feet. "You set a trap." Another shinobi came rushing in. "There's no trap, honorable grandson," the man exclaimed, giving Naruto the stink eye. The blonde dismissed him and focused on his accuser, instantly annoying the elite shinobi who recognized him since he was without his usual mask and bandana. "I did not," Naruto said coolly. The boy visibly pouted and screamed again. "You did. Little boy, it's rude to accuse someone for one's own failing. Please accept that you tripped over yourself and leave. You cannot just barge in on someone when they are in a meeting, especially between a military leader and one of their subordinates," Naruto stated firmly. The boy's face scrunched up in anger. "I'm the Hokage's grandson. You can't tell me what to do," he shouted before tossing a collection of shuriken at him. Naruto caught them easily and tucked them into his pocket with an out-of-character eye roll. The Hokage sighed and shook his head. "Honorable grandson," the man exclaimed. Seeing his first attack was ineffective, the small boy charged his opponent. "I'll get you," the boy screamed, and Naruto sighed, catching the brat by his collar and holding him out, dangling in the air like he preferred to have held and carried Tora if he wasn't so sure the animal would have escaped readily. "Let me go," the boy cried out, thrashing wildly. "Let him go, he's the Sandame's grandson," the shinobi protested angrily. "You can't harm him." Naruto cocked a brow at the Hokage before dropping the kid down on his butt. The kid hopped to his feet and scrambled to hit him, but Naruto merely pressed a hand to the kid's forehead and kept him shoved away. The pint-sized child swung at him wildly though made no contact. Both Naruto and Hokage exchanged an exasperated look. The boy's tutor was puffing up like an irritated peacock, and Naruto would have liked to pull his tail feathers out forcibly or used one of his few Kaiden jutsus to light them up. "If he's so weak that he needs his grandfather's protection," Naruto drawled, "his grandfather shall have a say." "Hokage-sama, may I?" The Hokage sighed and nodded. Clenching his fist, Naruto brought it down on the boy's head just like Iruka did to his more troubling students. "Itai," the boy said before staring at him in amazement. "Would I do that for?" He couldn't believe somebody actually hit him. "You are careless and you are weak," Naruto stated. "Become strong enough that people speak your name first and then remember you were a Hokage's grandson." He turned and gave the Hokage a bow. "I'll take my leave then, if that is all right with you, sir," Naruto said with finality as the shinobi instructor and his student gaped at him. "You're free to go, Naruto. I'll see you when you report for your next mission," the Hokage said. The boy gave a final bow and disappeared through the doorway. Sarutobi watched his grandson stare after the genin in amazement before dashing after him, his tutor still stunned stupid. Covering his face with his hands, Hiruzen felt his age. He just hoped Konohamaru didn't learn anything weird following Naruto around. Kiba was laughing his ass off when he saw that Naruto had picked up a stalker. Behind Team 7, ill-hidden, was Konohamaru. The younger boy followed Naruto by dashing in short sneaking darts after him, and stalking him by hiding rather badly behind trash cans, electricity poles and corners. Naruto sighed behind his replacement mask and glared at both of his teammates. "You guys go ahead," he finally said, disgruntled. "I have to see what he wants." Kiba shrugged and Shino nodded, leaving their third teammate behind. Walking towards the incorrectly positioned fence tarp, he grabbed it and pulled it down slightly. "What is it?" he said mildly. "Is there something I can help you with?" he asked. The boy flushed. "I want you to teach me, boss," he shouted, and Naruto clapped his hands over his ears to block out the loud noise. He was much too similar to an Aburame after all these years. "Okay," Naruto said, slightly dazed. "What exactly do you want me to teach you?" "I'm a genin, a brand new one at that. A rookie genin as they like to call us." The boy blinked at him. "Don't you have some awesome jutsu?" he asked. "Like, a signature move?" "I have techniques I painstakingly labored at for years. I do not have a signature move." "That's lame." "No, signature moves do not belong in the shinobi world. Signature moves belong in manga." The blonde replied. "A shinobi trains in all manner of things to become strong. There is no one move that makes them all powerful. Power is gained through hard work and dedication. No shortcuts, no one size fits all. You tailor your abilities to what you are willing and able to do and fulfill your goals and requirements." Naruto said sternly. "A shinobi is a weapon of the village. If you are going to go into battle with inferior grade weapons, then you shouldn't bother at all. It will only result in pain, defeat, and misfortune on the part of you, your teammates, and the mission's objectives. Then, you have a whole bunch of awesome techniques." Konohamaru asked. The genin sighed and gripped the boy by his collar before slinging him onto his back. "Hold on, kid, I am going to take you to my favorite spot in the whole village." Stretching his legs out, Naruto did something he hadn't in a while. He ran full melt through the streets, leaping to and fro from the sides of the buildings while using shortcuts he'd learned while fleeing from mobs. All the while Konohamaru gazed around in wonder. There was no wind today, but his hair fluttered and a cool breeze hit his face. "Wow," he thought, glancing at the ninja below him in surprise and amazement, "it's like flying." They swiftly cut through the forest and up a path to the top of the monument. They landed tidily and Naruto let him off his back. "This is my favorite spot," the blonde said with a smile. "What do you see, kid?" he asked, looking down at the village. "The village?" he said questioningly up at the genin. The older boy smiled at him. "Anything else?" he asked. "The gate?" Naruto shook his head at the answer. "Life," the blonde said. "People, kid, look around." He gestured as he sat down and crossed his arms over his knees and leaning forward. "There are thousands of people in Konoha, thousands of people who depend on shinobi and one another to be happy, safe, and loved," the genin said, Naruto's eyes moving over the different districts and buildings with a fondness. "Now what makes up Konoha, The brunette stared at him, not comprehending. "The buildings?" Konohamaru asked, knowing he was missing something. Naruto sighed and shook his head. "Come here, kid," Naruto said. "What scares you the most?" "Not being recognized," Konohamaru answered instantly before slapping his hand over his mouth in embarrassment. Sounds pretty similar to my own fear," Naruto answered. "It is? I mean, aren't you a little old to be scared?" the academy student asked. Naruto sighed. "You are never too old to be scared," Naruto said patiently. "The thing that scares me the most is being alone and losing all of my precious people that I have now and could have in the future." "Precious people?" Konohamaru asked. "Your Jii-chan, for example," Naruto said. "He is one of your precious people, right?" "Yeah," Konohamaru said in instant agreement. "He's a stinky old fart, but I wouldn't give him up for anything." The man in question coughed in embarrassment as he observed them via his crystal ball and muttered impertinent under his breath. "You'd do anything to protect him, right? Beat up anyone mean to him?" Naruto continued. "Yeah, of course," Konohamaru replied. "Nobody messes with anyone I care about. I won't stand for it." Naruto laughed warmly and smiled brightly at him. "That's how your grandfather and I feel about this entire village. That's what every shinobi feels when they go into battle if they're good shinobi. Dedication, love, and perseverance. A true shinobi does not learn fancy moves so he can impress people or win fights. He learns fancy moves and wins fights for his precious people. Konoha is the home of these precious people." That's why I fight and train and learn. Naruto stood up and picked the boy up so he could get an even better view. What about you, kid? Do you see and get my point? The boy nodded slowly, eyes wide and shining. You got it, boss. He said, thrusting a clenched fist into the air. I'm going to become strong enough to protect the village and all my precious people. He shouted. Good little minion, Naruto teased. The boy pouted. I'm not a minion, he whined, and my name isn't Kid, it's Konohamaru. He bellowed. I'm gonna be the strongest ninja I can be and protect all my precious people. Naruto laughed in delight. You'd better or I'll hit you even harder than I did in Hokage-sama's office. Naruto said with a bright smile. Believe it, boss. Better show it then. Okay, so you have a minion? Shino asked in amusement. I am his boss, am I not? Naruto shot back with a grin. That makes him my minion, no? His best friend snorted and turned back to his book while shaking his head. I cannot agree or refute that statement, he said blandly. But it does appear you have a little tag-along now. Naruto smiled ruefully. Yes, indeed I do, he said in confirmation. He's an okay kid though. What did you do with him for the past 3 hours though? Shino asked. Naruto had missed dinner with his teammates, though neither really minded since Kiba had been dragged away by his sister to do chores he'd been slacking off on and Shino had gotten caught up with a semi-rare insect. We played ninja, Naruto said with a smile. And I taught him some. Played ninja? Shino asked amused. He does know you're already a genin, right? With a Hite 8 and everything? He calls it training, Naruto replied mildly. The Kakaichu user snorted in amusement. So how did you play ninja? Shino queried. It was like advanced tag. I showed him how to set traps and then had him hide while I tracked him and graded them, Naruto said. He did fairly well. He's got a steady hand, although he needs some work on his chemical knowledge since he can't make smoke bombs all that well. You also said you were teaching him? Shino pointed out. What did you teach him? I started on some of the simpler traps, of course, chakra control, henge and a defensive kata. I could have done more, that is, I would have until his bratty teacher showed up and tried to drag him away. Naruto frowned at this. I hate Ebisu, he was unnecessarily rude. What happened? Shino asked, seeing the dark look. He shut his book and sat up straight, meeting his best friend's gaze behind his sunglasses. Well, it happened like this. Flashback. Naruto had Konohamaru set up basic traps, ones that Naruto taught him first, and hide from the genin, as training on being stealthy. Giving the boy a 10-minute head start after the last trap was laid, he set off. Expertly dodging through a few simple traps, eyeing them knowledgeably to see how well they were hidden and made, he tracked the boy. They were passable, he thought quietly to himself, and Naruto had no doubt that the boy would learn to make them even better with some time and practice. Following his trail through the trees, he easily leapt from one to the other, controlling his chakra in steady bursts. He caught sight of the scarf and grinned. Found you. He sang out, capturing the boy easily, earning a startled but excited yelp. Wow, Konohamaru said, stopping the watch with a click, taking in the time. That was so fast, boss. That's what training gets you, Naruto said cheerfully, putting the boy down and resetting the watch. I left the traps up for you to dismantle. They're passable, but a few looked pretty flimsy. The boy pouted, but Naruto ignored it easily. I want you to dismantle them and return to me as quickly and safely as you can. He ordered him lightly. The boy nodded and ran off. 15 minutes later, he came back carrying all of the equipment with a grin. Good job, Naruto said with a smile. What did you learn? Easiest way to dismantle is to trigger him. He answered. Well, the wire ones at least. Naruto nodded. Most traps were elaborate in setup but simple in removal if the person making them knew what to do. So, Naruto said, trying to figure out what to do next. Want to learn henge? He really had no idea what to do with the kid. Henge? A jutsu? The boy brightened. Yeah, do you know the symbols for it? Naruto asked. We haven't started learning them in class yet, but I was taught a few by that Ebisu guy, Konohamaru said with a shrug. Naruto nodded and thought it over for a second. Well, let's get you down for the different hand seals and then I'll show you the jutsu. It'll be very basic though. Naruto warned him. Konohamaru merely grinned. Basics are gonna make me an awesome ninja, right? Right, then I'm okay with that. Naruto smiled and ruffled the boy's hair. Okay then, he said, showing him the first one. This here is. They went through each seal, Naruto patiently correcting the boy just as Sachi Obaa-san had with him when he was first learning. When he got it down, Naruto demonstrated a simple henge into Iruka-sensei. "Oa," Konohamaru gaped, "you look just like Amino-sensei." Naruto gave an in-character sheepish smile and scar rub before changing back in a quick pop. "Now I want you to try," Naruto said, crouching down. "Visualize who you want to turn into, their clothes, their skin color, even the way their hair usually is. When you get that image, hold onto it and do the jutsu." Konohamaru nodded with determination and went through the seals before shouting, "Henge." The boy was surrounded by a cloud of smoke before it dissipated to reveal a rather bad copy of the Hokage. "Not bad for a first try," Naruto said with a wince. Konohamaru released it with a pout. Ruffling the boy's only available hair, Naruto suggested, "Why don't you give it another go? Remember everything about the Hokage this time, from the way he smells to the way he talks. Everyone needs to practice to get better, Kono-kun. Don't let it bother you if it's not perfect the first few times." The boy brightened at the first use of a nickname and set his mouth into a line of determination. He would get this. 2 hours later he was able to perform the jutsu fairly well and his smile was brilliant at his success. "Good job," Naruto praised. "You did well." The boy hugged Naruto's waist and thanks. He rarely if ever got praised for his actual accomplishments, never mind actual lessons. "Thank you, Naru-ni-chan." Naruto flinched at the name. "Anyo, Kono-kun, I'm not." He was interrupted however when a loud bang in the clearing next to them announced someone's arrival via Shushin. "I found you," Ebisu shouted, grabbing Konohamaru up by the scruff of the neck. "Let me go," the boy shouted, flailing. "I don't want to go back with you, jerk." He kicked and punched ineffectively at the tall shinobi. "Please release him," Naruto requested mildly, irritated at the manhandling of his student and friend. "You ran off with the honorable grandson," the man accused, and Naruto rolled his eyes a second time. "No," the blonde genin drawled, "you lost him. Some elite shinobi you proved to be." The man colored. Naruto was hardly ever this rude or sarcastic, but people like Ebisu just rubbed him the wrong way. "We're leaving, honorable grandson. You've skipped enough lessons today." "Lessons? You call those lessons? I've learned jack from you, jerk." Konohamaru protested. "Naru-ne-chan is a better teacher than you." Naruto twitched at the incorrect suffix but let it go for now, he could always correct him later. "The boss is teaching me how to protect my precious people." Naruto smiled a bit proudly at Konohamaru's proclamation. It was good that such important values were being passed down, and now surely the man would understand. Ebisu, however, scoffed. "Oh, what have you learned from him? The little brat's pathetic, and wouldn't be able to do anything, let of all protect someone. Probably just get them killed," the man said, and both of them stiffened in outrage. Naruto's fine patience came to an end and he summarily put himself into what Sachi Obaa-san called his workspace of mind. "Konohamaru, remember what I told you about fighting off perverts?" the blonde asked in a deceptively calm manner. "Yeah, boss," the boy shouted. "Sing, then proceed." Ebisu, however, was a ninja and never learned to fear women. He was a closet pervert unable to even stand being near one without panting heavily. So he was unprepared when he sneered, "Sing? Show me your sing abilities then." "They're not abilities," Naruto said with a frown. "They're an acronym for what, Kono-kun, please demonstrate." The boy smiled wolfishly and reared his leg back and started with the first with a shout. Stomach, the boy gave a hard kick to the stomach, making the man drop him in surprise as his breath left him with the incredibly painful move. Instep. He stomped hard on the arrogant snot's foot as he landed, grinding down to increase its effectiveness. Nose. The boy jumped up and kicked the man in the face, leaving an imprint of his sandal, and landed pulling back his properly curled fist and shouted, "Groin." The 10-year-old's fist plowed into the shinobi's jewels. His punch properly formed and stands solid just like Naruto had demonstrated and taught. "URK," the tutor said as he finally collapsed to the ground. Konohamaru straightened and propped his hands on his hips with a grin, chest puffed out proudly. "Looks painful," Konohamaru said with satisfaction and a firm nod denoting how pleased he was. "Good." "Konohamaru," Naruto said primly. "Remember what it is for." "I remember, boss, only against perverts or in emergencies." Konohamaru answered, flashing a quick victory sign with his fingers. "Good." Now, since he appears to be unconscious, I'm going to take this opportunity to show you how to tie up bad guys, Naruto said with a slightly evil glint as he pulled out a hank of hemp rope. This is a very good skill to learn, so watch closely. You got it, boss, Konohamaru said excitedly. The duo quickly went through one of the basic hojojutsu techniques. Naruto graciously untied Ebisu from the example and let Konohamaru practice, doing it with careful precision. When they were finished, the man's ankles, wrists, and neck were connected to one another and he would have difficult moving, let alone escaping. Feeling generous, Naruto was willing to toss a rope over a branch and haul the man's undefended body into the open air away from predators, his soft, unprotected stomach dangling down in an uncomfortable arch. Smacking his hands clean of dirt, the genin turned to smile at his minion. Good. Now, do you want to go get a snack? Naruto chirped cheerfully. Konohamaru cheered with an excited head bob before they left. Flashback end. And so we got Dango, and while eating he fell asleep, so I took him home before coming back. Naruto finished his tale of his adventure with the Sandame's grandson. Shino stared at his best friend silently, his face slightly slack in incredulity. You taught a 10-year-old how to fight using Sing? Didn't you get that technique from attending some anti-rape class with Hinata-chan? Shino said in disbelief. Yes. However, the technique is effective in its usage. Naruto replied mildly. After all, he is the Hokage's grandson and an academy student, so some form of defense was needed to be taught to him. As it is, he will not start actually fighting with taijutsu against his peers until the new school year, Naruto reasoned with a smirk. Iruka-sensei, I am sure, will appreciate a little outside coaching. Of course, Shino said. A companionable silence formed after that as Shino thought it out. How long was he in that tree for? Shino asked when he realized Naruto hadn't mentioned whether or not the shinobi had escaped to harass the pair further. I have no idea actually. That depends on whether or not he got out of Kono-kun's hojojutsu practice yet, Naruto stated. Shino stared at his friend before turning back to his book. The shinobi was, supposedly, an elite junin, so if he couldn't get out of a 10-year-old's inexperienced rope work, he deserved whatever came for him. Kurenai was surprised to see Kakashi seated at the bar nursing a cup of sake, his little orange book out of sight. Kakashi, she said as she sat down next to him, earning a disinterested glance. Kurenai, he said placidly. Hard day? He took in her slight must and put out state. She looked like she'd been dragging things through the forest and bush all day. She had to be exhausted to go out for a drink without changing. She was a bit of a clothes horse like that. Nara deer are just as lazy as their masters, Kurenai said ruefully and motioned to the barkeep to get her own bottle of sake and a cup. They appeared quickly and she let out a long sigh of relief after her first cup. They don't spook or anything, just stand there staring with strangely intelligent eyes that look almost amused. Don't fall for bribes either, not unless they're especially witty. Of course, for certain foods they'll move easily. She snorted in humor as a sudden image came up and Kakashi glanced at her in question. She smirked and explained, just remembering Haruno's face when one of the deer decided her hair was cotton candy and would be delicious to eat. Then when the rest made a consensus that it was time to try it, Kakashi's face morphed into a smirk and the silver-haired Junin laughed. The deer tried to eat one of your genin's hair? Kakashi asked. You're saying it like as though the deer didn't succeed. They easily got several centimeters, Kurenai replied wryly. Kakashi perked up with a grin. Tell me more. Kurenai worked through her second bottle and Kakashi his third when they were joined by Asuma, who sat down with a grunt. Asuma, Kakashi said, way of greeting. Kurenai just offered a smile. The man didn't say anything immediately and instead the two watched as the man got his bottle and knocked it back with relish, not even bothering with the cup, gulping it like a dying man of some sort. I'm probably going to choke one of my genin, the former Guardian 12 ninja stated mildly when he finished his bottle. They suck. Kakashi couldn't help but snort. Who's getting on your last nerve? Kurenai asked curiously. Yamanaka? Pretty much, the smoker replied. Damn girl keeps moaning about the Uchiha and how much the other two suck or how this is doing nothing for her diet. It's annoying. Diet? Kurenai asked in disbelief. She's 12, and a ninja. Unless she's pigging out, I highly doubt she needs to diet. Unbelievable. You are going to beat it out of her head, right? Kakashi asked mildly. I remember that Chunin Amino suggesting a visit to Anko's Both Kurenai and Asuma stopped to think it over before sighing. Haruno's fairly useless, however I have another 5.5 months to fix her. If that doesn't work I'll withhold their application to the Chunin exams, Kurenai muttered. Hinata and Sasuke seem to know how to be good shinobi. I just have to curb some of their worse obsessions and boost up their confidence. Ino just needs to be dragged out of the mentality that she's better than everyone and doesn't need to practice as much since she's the heir to the Yamanaka clan. The other two are just not motivated by the right things. However, they're less of a headache than the Kunoichi. All three Junin grimaced. None of my brats are like that, but I think that's because Uzumaki and Aburame balance Inuzuka out. They're already fairly close-knit for a group that's only been formed for a few days. I have to leave all my books at home or in my pouch when I'm with them though, Kakashi said with a sigh at the end. You do? Asuma queried in surprise. They're willing to work, Kakashi said. Plus I really would rather not get my favorite book stolen by them again in one of our practice spars. The last time I brought it they left me tied up for an hour in a web trap and had the book covered in puppy pee. Both of the other Junins laughed at this and Kakashi merely pouted under his mask as he filled his cup once more and drank from it. When Asuma and Kurenai got a hold of themselves, Asuma leaned forward and grinned. Would Daya say about pitting our two teams against each other in a training exercise? You know some spars? Kurenai perked up at this. I wouldn't be against that. Sasuke-kun could use a male partner to fight against. As it is, he only has Hinata-chan that he can practice with. Sakura-chan's too useless in anything physical to make an attempt, Kurenai said. Kakashi fingered his chin thinking it over. We have practice tomorrow, so why don't you bring them over whenever? I'll let my genin know, I'm pretty sure they'd be happy with it. Kakashi offered. Good, Asuma said with cheer before flagging down the barkeep. I need another 2 of these. He explained, I've got my first genin team and I promised myself I'd have 1 for each of the little troublemakers. Might even make it 2, since it's been that bad of a day. Naruto was surprised to see Konohamaru bright and early the next morning but allowed it since class didn't pick up for another week and a half. Letting him in, the younger boy marveled over the fact he lived alone and among the secretive Aburames. So you want to train under me still? Naruto asked. Yeah, you're the best ever, Nei-chan. Konohamaru expounded. Ebisu didn't get out of my rope ties until after midnight apparently. Gigi-chan showed me via his crystal ball. Wasn't that a little late for you to be up? Naruto asked in humor though he made a note to correct the boy's assumptions on his gender once again. And I'm not your Nei-chan. I am your Ni-chan, Kono-kun, Naruto said. The boy stared at him. Whatever you say boss, the boy stated disbelieving. Because I've seen a lot of girls uglier than you are. Yes well, Naruto cleared his throat, I am male. I do know how to pretend to be a girl since it is part of my training, so maybe that's why you are confused. So you're a tranny? Was Konohamaru's conclusive question. The honorable grandson got punched again. Kakashi appeared in the training ground and nearly burst out laughing. One of his genin had a duckling of a sorts following after him. Since he was earlier than usual, 10 minutes late instead of whole hours, he got to catch Kiba rolling on the ground laughing. Nei-chan? Kiba choked out. He calls you Nei-chan? Kiba, you are acting disgraceful. Naruto said with an embarrassed flush. Get up and stop laughing. Did you show him your Oryo no Jutsu? The Inuzuka asked as he finally got a hold of himself. Oryo no Jutsu? Konohamaru asked in curiosity. The blonde actually smacked himself in the face with a groan before kicking Kiba in a fit of childishness. Can you demonstrate? Kakashi asked, startling all of them except Shino, who'd seen him and given him his usual welcoming head nod. The blue eyes widened beneath his bandana and turned pleading. The Junin ignored it. It's not dangerous, right, Naruto? Kakashi prompted. The blonde sighed but accepted for the fact he'd likely be called Nei-chan by his little brother figure for the rest of his life. No, it's not, but make sure to remember I was still born male. Even after I do this technique, got it? He snapped sternly. Rolling his eyes, he turned and taunted Kiba, do try not to drool, puppy dog. Hey. Kiba protested and Naruto merely tossed his head slightly before going through the different seals quickly. Oryo no Jutsu. A cloud of pink smoke enveloped Naruto and after it disappeared in its place was a charming girl. Transformation complete, the girl said brushing her tangle of golden hair out of her face. She looked like an older Naruto, but with a fully and generously developed body, hair down, and no whiskers. Kakashi instantly used Kai to dispel it and arched an eyebrow in surprise. There was no change and Naruto coyly, in character, slapped his shoulder at the action. "It's solid?" he asked, gesturing for one of her hands. Naruto rolled her eyes and nodded, giving it to him. "Wow," Konohamaru said, jaw-dropping open. "Is this like a super henge, Ne-chan?" Naruto let out another sigh before glowering at Kiba, who was too busy trying not to see his teammate as an object. The body was covered in a flimsy-looking baby doll dress of green that ended at mid-thigh with matching silver heels that made the already tan and incredibly long legs even more attractive. "Yes, in a manner, Kono-kun," Naruto replied. Kakashi kept prodding and testing it, though Naruto slapped his hands away from his more personal and private areas with a glare. The man didn't try it again when he heard the angry hum of Kakaichu and met the gaze of a displeased Shino. "Can you teach me?" the 10-year-old asked. "I'll think about it," was the response. "Please?" started the begging, which continued for the next several minutes between the two. Kiba, wisely for once, refrained from saying the two reminded him of he and his sister when he was younger. The blonde finally got fed up with it and made his ultimatum. "If you can successfully do a henge, a clone jutsu, and a substitution jutsu to my approval, I'll agree to actually consider it. Until then you're on chakra control exercises," he said in a final manner. The boy pouted but gave in. "Go find a leaf and practice. Better yet, why don't you review the different traps I showed you? Fetch your supplies, I'll let you test the things you learned the other day on Kiba-kun," he said, ignoring his teammate's indignant cry of "what?" The boy brightened and ran off to get his tools. The Hokage, after seeing his lessons in traps, had given him some of his own supplies and a bit of money to buy more, which meant Naruto had taken him shopping for even more building materials before coming to the training field. "I'll be back quickly, Ne-chan," he shouted as he disappeared in a cloud of dust. Naruto groaned at the name. "Your minion is quite exuberant," Shino said, and Kiba started laughing again while Kakashi couldn't help but smile. The blonde just smacked himself in the face in exasperation, dragging his hand over his face tiredly before glaring at them. Akamaru jumped into his arms and he pouted around the dog. "You three," he said with great maturity, "just suck." Team 8 and Team 10 showed up around the same time at Training Field 7 and started butting heads. Or well, Ino and Sakura started butting heads. "Nice hair, forehead," Ino snarled as she took in the newly shortened hair. While still long, she was now required to have it pinned up, thus making it look more like her old bob in the back. "Decided you needed a new look? Because you need a new face. I'm not ugly in the least. If anyone could use a new face, as well as a new personality, it would be you, Ino Pig." Sakura snapped back, their heads coming together and pressing hard in a series of small shoves via their foreheads. Their long-suffering teammates merely ignored them and joined Team 7, who paused in their chakra control training. The three Junin were currently meeting up by the gate a little ways away from the fighting girls, discussing something and couldn't be bothered to break it up, so they all ignored them. "Hello," Naruto said as he jumped off of the stick he was forced to balance on. The staff stayed planted until he touched it again and unstuck it from the ground, several pieces splintering off into smaller shapes and sticks and were promptly sealed away. The leaf he'd stuck to his head fluttered to the ground, as did the ones on his arms, torso and legs. "Chakra control exercises?" Hinata asked, recognizing it as one of the more advanced and combined ones. She smiled and waved slightly at Shino when he joined them. "Yes, good eye, Hinata-chan," Naruto complimented with a smile. "We're glad you could make it," he said, politely giving them a short bow in greeting before cocking a confused brow at the two girls catfighting. "Your teammates, I assume?" he asked, and the two pairs nodded tiredly. Both girls were louder than their quieter companions and it was quite taxing to be around them usually, but combined it was exhausting. "My sympathies," he said to them. Shino nodded in agreement at his words. "It could be worse," Shikamaru said as he hunched next to Choji. "Yeah," the Akamichi said, "we could be on a team with both of them." Sasuke visibly shuddered. "Yeah, well," Kiba said, coming over as he wiped the sweat from his brow and catching part of the discussion. "No crazy Kunoichi on Team 7, just someone who can, URK." The four blinked in surprise as the dog user curled over the sudden elbow to the gut he'd gotten from the usually gentle and quiet Uzumaki. All of them stared at the sweet look on his face and sweat dropped. The usually mild-tempered blonde looked fit to kill. "You have dug your grave once today," the boy said mildly, "do not start filling it in. Or I will make you Kono-kun's practice partner in every scene variation and the lead runner in each trap tag game until he makes Chunin, better yet Junin, Kiba-kun." Kiba paled and nodded. The past few hours serving as Konohamaru's training partner had been exhausting and he'd been overjoyed when the boy left to go home for the day. He did not want to be stuck doing that again indefinitely. Kakashi-sensei had made it even worse by having Naruto do a number of demonstrations for Konohamaru, telling the blonde to leave his traps up and making Kiba's already difficult runs more troublesome. The group, however, looked slightly confused. "Sing?" Sasuke asked. Hinata piped up at this, knowing what he was talking about. It's a defense combo civilian girls learn against perverts and attempted rapists," Hinata explained. "It's an AC acronym that stands for stomach, I instep, nose and gr groin. The series in which you should hit the person when they grab you from behind," Hinata said. "Most Kunoichi don't bother learning it, but Naruto-kun and I took a class back when we were 10. "Why would you take that?" Choji asked curiously as he worked through his chip bag. He offered it to Naruto, who took a chip in thanks and nibbled on it before answering. It was a surprisingly cute gesture, but they all wondered how he ate through the mask. "I may have to play the role of a civilian female on a mission," Naruto illuminated, "so it would be a good idea how to act like one and defend myself like one." Shikamaru nodded slightly in understanding, though he was too lazy to comment. "I believe Hinata-chan took it because it would be a fun outing we could both enjoy." It was good stress relief, she agreed. Naruto and they shared a smile and the rest of the boys got a rather girly feeling from it. It was much different than the rather bitchy fight going on behind them between Sakura and Ino. To be honest, the male genin, except Naruto, didn't understand why the other girls couldn't be like Naruto and Hinata. Calm, helpful, able cooks, and reliable ninja. Fangirls sucked, the boys thought collectively. "We'll have to go shopping together again soon," Naruto suggested. "And, y'all wonder why Konohamaru calls Ya-ne-chan. Youch." Kiba muttered and earned a sharp heel jab from Naruto. The boy hopped for a second on one foot, nursing the bruised appendage while glaring at the blonde, earning himself an amused smirk that had just begun baring teeth in a rather dangerous manner. "Ah, sensei," Shino said, secretly in relief when he noticed the Junin instructor's approach. He'd seen the glint in his best friend's eyes and knew that the talk was spiraling down into madness. "Are we going to get an explanation now?" he asked, and the Junin nodded as he formed up with his two colleagues. "Yes," Kakashi said. "Well, we decided to let you get some experience fighting with members not on your team." "So sparring?" Ino asked as she and Sakura joined them. "Can we sit it out?" Shikamaru looked up in interest at that question. "No, anyone not sparring will be running laps," Asuma said. Shikamaru drooped. "Che," he muttered, "troublesome. It would be more troublesome if you collapsed in the middle of a mission, Shikamaru-san," Naruto said, "especially on one where you could end up killed. Or worse yet, a teammate. You'd hate to have Choji's death on your conscience, right?" The Nara heir straightened at that and glowered darkly to the side. "Exactly," Kurenai said with a slight and approving smile at Naruto, while Asuma made a note to use that excuse to get his boys going since both took their best friend's safety quite seriously. "These matches will not be strictly taijutsu, so you may use any shinobi art you have. Do refrain from seriously injuring anyone though." The genin nodded. "How will we be pairing up?" Sakura asked, eyeing the others warily. "We will be picking your opponent," Kakashi said with a smile as he bent forward. "And we'll only announce it at the start of the match, so be prepared. You could be fighting anyone who is not on your team." The genin sized one another up, only Ino and Sakura looking scared about it. Both Choji and Shikamaru looked reluctant. "How many times will we be fighting?" Naruto asked, and Shikamaru focused once more. "Until you pass out," the three Junin said with a cheerfulness that made the genin shiver in dread. "Troublesome," Shikamaru growled. "So troublesome." Sasuke studied Uzumaki and Aburame closely as they waited for their turn and chatted with Hinata as their teammate fought Choji. There were loud crashes and curses from the two, but it was a respectful fight at least. Sakura was currently arguing with Ino over something while Shikamaru appeared to be napping in the shade of a tree. Who do you think you will be paired up with, Hinata-chan? Naruto asked from the other side of her Sasuke positioned on her left. Maybe Ino or, I don't know. She said thinking it over. Sasuke thought it was likely as well, especially since any fight between Ino and Sakura was sure to become a brawl instead of a learning experience. It is probable, Shino agreed. I personally wonder who I shall be fighting. You might go against Shikamaru. You are both distance specialists and strategists. Naruto said. Maybe Sakura. I feel that the only fight she's getting today will be to learn brains are nice indoors but you need a body to complete the mission completely. Sasuke agreed with that as well. The pinkette seemed determined to be as useless as possible. Hinata, however, picked up on who the last unmatched pair in the group's estimate was. So you'll be going against Sasuke-kun, Naruto-kun? Hinata probed. Sasuke tuned in on this and the two boys met each other's gaze in an assessing manner. We both need someone who has a wide variety of attack types. Naruto reasoned out. Also, our taijutsu is fairly similar as well, since we go for speed and precision. Sasuke nodded at that, knowing his fighting style had been summed up correctly. He wouldn't mind fighting him either. Uzumaki had always been a decent sparring partner during school, though it had been clear he had been holding back. Do you agree, Sasuke-kun? Hinata asked him and he realized he'd always been included in the discussion. It's likely, he replied with a grunt. They heard Kiba shout in victory as Choji collapsed in a tired pile on the ground with a grunt. Akamaru landed on the boy's chest as Kiba pinned his legs. The fight was declared over and Kiba got up with a lively jump as Choji sat up tiredly. Yes, you did good, Akamaru. The boy said lifting his dog up into the air excitedly. Akamaru having served as an excellent distraction and guide for his partner during the fight, guiding Kiba during his attacks and defenses. You'll do better next time, Choji, Asuma told his genin. He just has more stamina and slightly better chakra control. Both things can be easily fixed. The dirty blonde nodded, a bit discouraged before getting to his feet. Kiba grinned at him. Nice fight, man. Kiba said bouncing over, you're pretty strong. Is that 'cause of your clan's jutsu? Choji blinked in surprise before nodding awkwardly. Shikamaru cracked an eye open and watched the two interact before shutting it again with a slight smile. It would be good if Choji got more people who believed in him. Next up, Sasuke-kun and Uzumaki-kun. Kuronai called out and the two exchanged a glance before going over. I want a good fight, Naruto said with a smile. So I won't be holding back. Sasuke felt a small bundle of warmth enter his stomach and the adrenaline start pumping through his blood. You better not, Dobi, he replied. You'll lose if you do. Naruto's smirk was apparent through his mask. Let's see how well you do, Rookie of the Year. He replied, brushing some lint of his shoulders. Sometimes boys can only talk to each other through their fists.
That's all for now. If you enjoyed this video, then please like, share and do comments.